In the South Carolina capital and across the state, the first Southern showdown of the 2024 Republican presidential race is now underway. Voters choosing between the undefeated GOP frontrunner Donald Trump and their former governor Nikki Haley, who's vowing to fight Trump to the bitter end. Welcome to CNN's live special coverage of the South Carolina Republican primary. I'm Anderson Cooper.
And I'm Jay Tapper in the CNN Election Center. There is less than 1 hour left for voters in the Palmetto State to cast their ballots. Donald Trump and Nikki Haley, of course, going head-to-head on Haley's home turf, raising the stakes for her campaign and making their fight perhaps even more combative. Trump is counting on another decisive win that would bring the former president closer to clinching the Republican nomination, even as he's juggling court appearances and indictments. He faces his first criminal trial next month. This could be Haley's last chance to slow Trump's march toward becoming the nominee. The self-proclaimed underdog is hoping to beat expectations tonight, but she says she's going to stay in the race no matter what the outcome today. The fight is all about winning delegates, of course. 50 delegates are on the line in South Carolina. This is the most of any single contest yet. Now, heading into this evening, Trump leads Haley on the delegate count. He has 63. She has 17. Both still a long way from the 1,215 needed to lock up the GOP nomination. The first results are going to start coming in once voting ends. That's at the top of the hour, and that will be our first chance to potentially project a winner. Our correspondents are on the scene where votes are being cast and counted, and at Trump and Haley campaign headquarters in South Carolina, Columbia and Charleston. Let's begin with CNN's Kristen Holmes, who's at Trump headquarters in Columbia. And Kristen, what is the thinking inside Trump world about tonight's fight against Haley?
Yeah, Jake, well, despite the fact that Donald Trump was outpaced by Nikki Haley on the campaign trail, was outspent by Nikki Haley, and that this is Nikki Haley's home state, she was the former South Carolina governor, they are expecting a resounding win. And if the polls hold, that win would look something like 30 points. And that's what they're hoping for. They want a definitive win for a number of reasons. As you said, to push him towards the actual delegate math that would make him become the presumptive GOP nominee. That would make him become the GOP nominee. Sorry, I think you guys can't hear me, so I'm going to move it up a little bit closer to me. But on top of that, it's also about donors. They want some of those holdout donors to come around. They want some of those Republicans who've been sitting on the sidelines hoping that there was a Trump alternative to get on board with the former president. They're also hoping that a definitive win would put extra pressure on the former South Carolina governor to drop out of the race, despite the fact, of course, as you noted, Haley has said she is not going to drop out until every primary vote is cast. Now, they want to pivot to a general election. They want to start using resources to pivot to a general election to attack President Joe Biden. But as you noted, it's going to be a very long several months because Donald Trump, in between having several of these campaign events and several primaries still, is going to be in and out of courtrooms, something we've learned is going to happen again next week. So as he is trying to pivot to general election, as he's trying to get through these primaries, again, all of those legal cases continue to loom over the former president.
All right. Thank you so much, Kristen. Now let's go to CNN's Brian Todd at a voting site in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, just outside Charleston. Brian, what kind of turnout have you been seeing?
Well, Jake, it's been a very dynamic day here, and don't let this scene behind me belie that, because there have been lines out the door all day long. We have had a new influx of voters coming in over the past few minutes, and they're coming out right now. No lines here right now, but again, this could be a last-hour crush of voters coming in here before the polls close in less than an hour. What we're told here by the precinct chair is that more than 2,000 voters have come through here. This is a place where there are 6 precincts voting in one location, Jenny Moore Elementary School here in Mount Pleasant. One of them is Bill Bell. Bill is kind enough to talk to us. I got to have full disclosure here, folks. Bill's had a rough day on the rugby field because he coaches a high school women's rugby team who didn't have their best day on the field, but still, Bill has shown up here. But I got to talk to you more, Bill, about your vote. You voted twice for Nikki Haley as governor, but you voted for Donald Trump here as president. Tell us why you've switched.
Well, I haven't switched. I still like Nikki Haley.
Right.
She was my governor, but Donald Trump did a great job as president. If you take his rhetoric away and you take away the tweets, a lot of good things were accomplished during his presidency. Heck of a lot better than what we've had the last 3 years. So a return, having Donald Trump come back in, is just going to help the economy, get the border secured, and he's not going to try to send anybody over to foreign wars.
As you know, Donald Trump has a few legal cases pending against him. If he is convicted in any of those cases, would that change your mind about him?
No, because it's all
Why?
BS.
All right, Bill. Well, thank you for talking to us.
Thanks.
Appreciate you coming by, and good luck next time on the field.
Yeah, y'all take
Thanks
care.
a lot. Okay. We're going to show you something here. Now, we're not allowed to film the voting live inside, but what I can do is kind of peer through the window here. Our photojournalist, Talk, is going to peer through the window there. You can see people casting their ballots through the window there. Last-minute voters coming in before the polls close. And then I'll take you over here very quickly, guys, just to show you what they're going to do as far as the tabulation. They're going to tabulate it on these strips of paper that look like giant CVS receipts, and then they're going to post it right here like these two things. It's going to look a lot like this. We're going to be able to go inside in less than an hour and show them tabulating the vote, which they will then post right here. Jake, back to you.
Yeah, that's not a giant CVS receipt. That's just a standard CVS receipt in my mind. Brian Todd, thanks so much. Let's go to John King at the Magic Wall here. And John, as Bill Bell, the rugby coach, noted, Nikki Haley has won South Carolina twice, but that's 2010, 2014. Since then, Donald Trump has won South Carolina 3 times.
Right. 2016 primary, 2016 general, 2020 general election, no primary then, he was the incumbent, which just reinforces, look, I started on the national map for a reason. Trump won again, Trump won again. Trump is 3-0. If Nikki Haley is going to stop Donald Trump, her home state is the best, perhaps last opportunity. And yet, all the polling coming in, people are voting today, so in some ways put the polls aside, but we do know that data, and it tells us Trump had a giant lead heading into Election Day. So as you watch the map, what are you looking for when we do start to get results, right? So I'm going to start down here in Charleston, because this is Charleston County. It's the 3rd largest county in the state. It's along the coast. This is your more affluent, your more moderate Republican. Some military retirees down there as well. This is where Nikki Haley must win if she's going to have any chance in the state, just because of the nature of the state. Although I just talked to 2 voters down in this county, both of them for Haley, who also say there's a lot of Trump talk down in there. I was just texting with them before we came on the air. So we'll watch how Charleston comes in. Another place to watch is up here, Horry County. This is where Myrtle Beach is. If any Republicans are going to have second thoughts about Donald Trump because he refuses to criticize Vladimir Putin, because he refuses to be tough when it comes to Russia, a lot of military tradition here. It used to be in South Carolina, you won the Republican race by being for lower taxes, less government, maybe pro-life on abortion, and for a strong military and against Russia or the Soviet Union. We'll see. That's a test there. The first place, though, Jeff, I started on the coast, Jake, but then you look up here. This is the Bible Belt area of South Carolina. Greenville is the largest county in the state right here. Number 1, about 10% of the population. Nikki Haley did very well here when she ran for governor. But I think you made the salient point. You say it's her home state. But since she was last on the ballot, it has become Trump's Republican Party.
It's been a decade since on the ballot. I mean, that's a long time.
Exactly right. And I was in there a couple weeks ago. And you get a lot of what Bill just told Brian Todd. I like her. She was a good governor. She'd make a great vice president. If she ran in 4 years, maybe I'd think about it. But I'm for Donald Trump. You just hear it over and over and over. They like her. They just love him.
All right, more on this in a second. We're getting an early read on who's turning out to vote in South Carolina today. Let's go to David Chalian with our exit polls. David, what are you learning about the voters that turned out today?
Well, Jake, what we're seeing in these preliminary exit polls, and these numbers will change as the night goes on and as we get more surveys in, is that this is a Republican primary electorate that looks more like the Iowa caucuses than it does the New Hampshire primary. Here's what I mean. Are you part of the MAGA movement? 45% of voters in the South Carolina Republican primary say yes, they're part of the MAGA movement. 49% say no. That's similar to what we saw in Iowa. In New Hampshire, it was only a third that considered themselves part of the MAGA movement. And look at party ID. This is critical. 69% say they identify as Republican. 21% identify as independent. That number in New Hampshire was 41%. And that is why Nikki Haley was able to do so well in New Hampshire, even though she still lost it by 11 points. So the fact that there are far fewer independents here is a problem for Nikki Haley. And of course, we checked in on how you're going to feel with the results here if indeed Trump wins the nomination. 72% of Republican voters say they're going to be satisfied. 27% say dissatisfied. I will note, among Haley voters, 76% will be dissatisfied if Trump's the nominee. Now, what about Nikki Haley if she wins the nomination? 41% say they would be satisfied. Overall, those voting in the South Carolina Republican primary today, 57%, nearly 6 in 10, will be dissatisfied if Nikki Haley is the nominee, Jake.
All right, David Chalian, fascinating stuff. Well, if I were Donald Trump, Dana Bash, Abby Phillip, and Manu Raju, I would look at those exit poll numbers and I'd think, ooh, I might even be having a better night than I thought I was going to have.
Yeah, and look, there's no question in anybody's mind, either in the Trump campaign or in the Haley campaign or in anybody pretty much on planet Earth right now, who doesn't think that he is going to have a good night in South Carolina. You hit the nail on the head. The question is, what is the percentage going to be? And we've already heard, though, despite that, in most contests, if somebody loses not once, not twice, but 3 times, particularly in their home state, it would be curtain call. And I'm going to go on and figure out what I'm going to do next. She's determined to stay in this. She still has money. She has, I'm told, she's getting more and more stubborn and, frankly, angry at the things that Donald Trump is saying about her, saying about her husband. We'll see how long that lasts, but for now, that is very much her plan.
But what's her rationale going to be for staying in? That's going to be the big challenge. And the question, if she does lose by some 30 points, as the polls are saying, and this is a very Trumpy electorate in her home state, very bad sign for her. What is she going to say when she comes out to explain her thinking or staying in a race where she's gotten wiped out state after state, and it's just simply not going to get easier? And she outspent Trump by about $15 million.
Yes, that's incredible.
In South Carolina, Trump barely lifted a finger, and he's on the way potentially to have a huge night tonight.
Yeah, I mean, a Trump person told me recently they barely invested in South Carolina in terms of money. They really don't want to have to do that with any of these primaries. That's why they want this thing to be over. But I am hearing a lot of questions about what is the end game for Nikki Haley in all of this. Where can she win? Where can she overperform? Where can she show that there's a reason for her to still be in it? One of the fascinating things that I see in these exit polls, as Chalian was going through them, is that this electorate, not just in South Carolina, but also in New Hampshire and in Iowa, even voters who may not consider themselves to be MAGA, they may not consider themselves to be election deniers, many of those voters are still voting for Donald Trump. And that is what has made it so difficult for anybody who is not named Donald Trump to have leeway with Republican voters right now. They're just not all that interested in alternatives, which is not what we hear from so many Republicans. I don't know, the Chris Sununu's of the world over the last 6 months who kept saying, oh, Republicans are hungry for an alternative. Well, the electorate so far has not shown us that.
One of the things that's interesting for those who out there who have a historical knowledge of South Carolina politics is South Carolina can be really dirty. We all remember, or I remember, 24 years ago, John McCain beat George W. Bush in New Hampshire. They went down to South Carolina, and it was dirty. All sorts of below the radar, innuendo, allegations, really, really nasty stuff. Donald Trump, I'm not saying that everything's been above board, mainly because Donald Trump has said some on stage in front of a microphone and a crowd, some pretty outrageous things about Nikki Haley and her husband. But I haven't heard anything about that. I haven't heard any really dirty, ugly, nasty politics because there hasn't been the need to do it.
Can I just say, maybe it's also because in decades past, the candidate would not have been doing these things, okay? Like, the candidate is not usually the person who is saying that that Nikki Haley's husband, who is over in a war zone, saying negative things about that. I mean, Trump has changed the game because he is the guy who's slinging the mud now. And so they don't need a swift boat veterans for truth.
It could have gotten worse, though, is all I'm saying.
It could have gotten
been a
much
lot
worse.
worse.
And it's not, and I think this is what you're suggesting, Jake, it's not as if the Trump campaign doesn't have an oppo book, because
it's not, they're not
everybody
above it.
does.
They're not above it.
And they have it, because that's what every campaign has. They haven't really used it that much. A little bit, but they haven't really used that much because they haven't seen.
Nastier was said about Nikki Haley when she was running for governor and running for re-election. I'm not saying any of it should be part of our political discourse, but I think they felt like they didn't need to do it. It's just an observation. I don't know what's going to happen.
She's the one who's been far more negative about Trump over the last few weeks, really dialing up the rhetoric, going after him in a way that she didn't as much in previous states. And just that exit poll that came out, just 27% of Republican voters would be dissatisfied if he won the nomination. That shows that those attacks really have not penetrated. Another point, too, is that the exit polls have shown that roughly 3/4 of voters made up their mind before January.
Yeah.
Those are already people who are locked in. So we'll see if they are the ones who ultimately vote for Trump. But what was her path in her home state? Maybe she didn't really have much.
And let's remember that she has said, and we're going to run the clip right now, that no matter what happens tonight, she's not going anywhere. She's sticking around at least until Super Tuesday. Take a listen.
I'll promise you this. I am in this fight I will take the bruises. I will take the cuts. I'll keep fighting until the American people close the door. That day is not today, and it won't be on Saturday, not by a long shot. We're going to keep going all the way through Super Tuesday. That's as far as I've thought in terms of going forward.
So those were her messages, Dan, on Monday, Tuesday, and today. So she's in it for at least a few more weeks, no matter what.
No matter what. And what I'm told from people around her that she is going to maybe say tonight, and certainly will continue to say, which is a version of what you just played, is voters deserve a choice. And if she drops out tonight or even tomorrow, then it will be the longest general election in history. I'm not sure if those facts are accurate, but that's the point that she is going to make. Your point, Abby, that if you look at the percentages over the past three or four contests, it doesn't seem as though they really want much of a choice. But she's not getting zero.
Yeah. There's much more ahead in our primary coverage as we count down to the end of voting in South Carolina and the first results from polling places across the state. Up next, we're going to discuss expectations for tonight and the road ahead with Haley's campaign manager and with a key Trump ally, South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham. Stay with us. It is decision time in South Carolina, the final minutes of voting in the Republican presidential primary. The state's former governor, Nikki Haley, facing a critical test of her long-shot bid to trip up the frontrunner, Donald Trump. Dana Bash?
Thanks, Cenk. Joining us now is a key South Carolina lawmaker, the senior senator from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, who, of course, has endorsed Donald Trump for president. I believe, Senator, you are at his campaign headquarters right now. Senator, earlier today you said nobody could beat Trump in South Carolina except Jesus. How important, though, is the margin of victory tonight? What do you think it will be? And I know you just got off the phone with the former president.
Yeah, he wants to know where the hell I'm at. I told him I was talking to CNN, and he says he loves you. So the bottom line is I think it'll be big. I think it'll be north of 20. 61% of the people in the exit poll said they were evangelical Christians. That bodes pretty well for the president.
Senator, you say that you want Nikki Haley to make her own decision about how long she stays in this race. But if you do see a resounding margin, maybe along the lines of what you just mentioned, will you call on her to drop out?
Well, she's a friend, and I want her to be part of the future of the Republican Party. I think she's very talented. We have a very similar worldview, and Nikki has a lot to offer the party, and I just think there'll come a point after tonight, if it's a big win, which I think it'll be, what's the narrative, what's the storyline? The voters have spoken, and most people are like me. I'm not voting against Nikki. I like her. I'm voting for Trump because I thought he's a good president who's been pretty badly treated. So that's what this election's about, is appreciation for Trump, not any lacking in her.
Well, you say that she's a friend and you want her to have a future in the party. Are you suggesting that if she stays in past tonight, assuming she does not do well, that would hurt her future?
I don't know, not really. The sooner we come together, the better. There's really no pathway for her after tonight. She did better than anybody from South Carolina running for president. She has a lot to be proud of, but we need to come together as quick as we can. I'm hoping President will give a gracious speech tonight and we get the party unified and focus on November. The sooner, the better.
Senator, last night, Donald Trump said at a gala for black conservatives that black people like him because of his 4 indictments and his mugshot, and said that black conservatives understand the greatest evils in the U.S., in the history of the U.S., have come from corrupt systems that try to target and subjugate others. And what's happened to black Americans is now happening to him. He's obviously a privileged white man. Do you think that kind of analogy does him favors with black voters?
Well, number one, I think African Americans have a higher propensity of going to jail than really anybody else in the population. That's why we did the First Steps Act under Trump to get people out of jail who've been serving long sentences for a multitude of misdemeanors. So he actually cares about this topic. But, you know, Trump believes he's a victim of an out-of-control system in Washington, New York, and Georgia, and I agree with that. So at the end of the day, I think he'll do I think he'll do better with African American voters than any Republican since Reagan.
Nikki Haley, your friend, called those comments by Trump disgusting. You don't agree?
Who's that?
Nikki Haley.
Who?
Nikki Haley.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Who?
Nikki Haley called those comments disgusting.
I think most, yeah. Yeah, well, I think, she has every right to say anything she wants. President Trump, when he was president, did a prison reform bill called First Steps that I think is one of the most historic pieces of legislation to get people out of jail who are serving long sentences, particularly African American and Hispanic. So I think his presidency was good for people of color, and I think he'll do well. And at the end of the day, the primary season is just about to end, and about an hour from now, this thing will be over.
Senator, before I let you go, do you want the former president, if he is the nominee, to pick your fellow senator from South Carolina, Tim Scott, as his running mate?
Yes. Yes. He has a lot of good choices. But Tim's ready to be president. He brings a lot to the table. I think Tim would be a great running mate for President Trump. I've shared that it'd be up to President Trump. He has a lot of good choices, but people love Tim Scott in South Carolina and in the Republican Party.
Well, you said you're going to go see him right after this interview. I'm guessing you're going to share that thought with him as well. Thank you. Senator, thanks for joining us tonight.
I'm playing golf with him tomorrow. I'll share it a lot.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Let's go to Kylie Atwood at Haley campaign headquarters in Charleston, South Carolina. She's with Governor Haley's campaign manager right now. Kylie?
That's right. This is Betsy Ankeny, Nikki Haley's campaign manager. We just heard there from Lindsey Graham saying that the sooner the party comes to get together as one, the better. Obviously, you guys think that's not the case. You think a competitive primary is a good thing. Nikki Haley said earlier today that she hopes that the results here in South Carolina are competitive. Can you define competitive?
Well, I think to get to what Senator Graham said, the only person who is helping Joe Biden is Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the only person who Joe Biden can defeat in November. So our fight is about saving this country, about ultimately winning in November and getting this country back on track. And whether you look at the polls or the history, Nikki Haley is the only candidate who can do that. So that's what we're focused on, and that's where the fight is.
But what's competitive here in South Carolina? Is it 10 points? Is it 20 points?
We've never put benchmarks like that. Nikki has said that as long as there is an appetite for her message, we will continue to fight.
So when you look at South Carolina, Nikki Haley and her allies has spent more than $16 million on advertising in the state. There has been more than 30 campaign events. You've been at most of those. This is also Nikki Haley's home state. If she can't win here, which Super Tuesday states can she win? She has such a competitive edge here, it seems.
Nikki Haley has been the underdog in this race the entire time. She has been the underdog in her career the entire time. This truly, as she said on Tuesday, is a David versus Goliath fight. We know that Trump is a juggernaut. We know that he is strong. We know that he has been the de facto leader of the party for the past 8 years. So breaking that hold is going to take a lot. So we are sprinting through the tape here. We have over 12 events planned in those Super Tuesday states, and we're going to keep fighting.
Which Super Tuesday states is the campaign plan to put resources into?
So we just announced that we are doing a a seven-figure buy in those Super Tuesday states. It's a national cable buy plus digital. We are going to be in Michigan tomorrow. We already announced a $500,000 buy there. Then we're heading to Minneapolis. We are going to be in Colorado, Utah, North Carolina, Virginia, Massachusetts, Maine, Vermont. So
that's a lot of states.
It's a lot of states. We're covering a lot of ground. There's a lot at stake here. So Nikki is going to be really sprinting through the tape there. She's going to be covering a lot of ground, and we're going to be taking her message to all of those people.
Appreciate it. We'll be watching. Jake?
Thanks, Kylie. And everyone, stay with us as we get closer to the end of voting in South Carolina. And our first chance to potentially project a winner in the Republican presidential primary. We have cameras and correspondents at key locations across the Palmetto State to bring you vote totals as they're announced. Stay with us. And we're back with our live coverage of the South Carolina Republican presidential primary. Voters have less than half an hour to put their stamp on the race between Donald Trump and Nikki Haley, a battle that has grown more bitter and increasingly personal in the lead up to the actual voting. Let's go to CNN's Boris Sanchez now. He's at a polling place in Rock Hill, South Carolina. Boris, what are you hearing from voters there?
Jake, a lot of divergent opinions among voters. The last-minute folks are just trickling in right now. As you said, less than 30 minutes away from that tabulation machine being shut down, the results going to the central location here in York County and then being tabulated. I do want to quickly get you to Max, who has been patiently waiting for us outside. Max came out to vote with his family. Thank you so much for being with us, Max. We're live right now. I understand that you supported Donald Trump, the former president, in this primary. Why?
Correct. So the three things that are most important to me is first is faith, my faith as a Christian. Second is my family. And then third, everything else gets trumped by America. I'm America first at the heart. When it comes to Donald Trump, I believe his proven experience as president was incredible for my personal family, for my religious beliefs, and as an entrepreneur, my business beliefs in America. Yeah.
Do you have any concerns about his legal challenges? Did any of the 91 charges that he's facing give you any pause to support him?
As somebody who has accidentally broken the law myself, carrying a firearm into an airport, I believe that the legal system can be confusing, not always transparent. And until he is charged, really found guilty for something and punished appropriately so for it, I am not concerned about where he stands currently with legal situations.
So if he is convicted, you would be potentially open to voting for someone else?
I don't know if I would go and, hold on, let me think for a second. It would have a serious impact on my decisions. I would say that. I would honestly say that is probably where my stance is currently. It would have a serious impact on my decisions.
Hey, Max, thank you so much for sharing your opinions with us. We do very much appreciate it. We'll let you get to your family. I know you've been waiting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, Jake, a lot of different types of voters here, as you just heard from Max, a Trump voter there. Earlier, we spoke to some Nikki Haley supporters, including a Democrat who voted in this open primary, saying that she would vote for Nikki Haley in the general election. Again, 30 minutes to go before we start seeing results, Jake.
Thank you so much, Boris. Max, of course, just one of many, many voters of faith in South Carolina. Let's go to David Challian with more exit poll information. David, what issues do voters have on their minds as they went to the polls today?
Yeah, we asked what's the most important issue of your vote today, Jake, and immigration. 41% of Republican primary voters in South Carolina say immigration. This is the first time we've seen immigration pop as the most important issue. It's been high up there, but now it's on top. 31% say the economy. Foreign policy is down at 11%, abortion at 10%. We also asked, what are your feelings about the way things are going in the United States today? This is an angrier electorate in South Carolina than we saw in New Hampshire a few weeks ago. 46%, the plurality, say they're angry about the way things are going in the U.S. Another 42% are dissatisfied. So 88% either dissatisfied or angry. That's toxic for incumbent like Joe Biden. The condition of the nation's economy. Only 2% of voters in the primary say it's excellent. 14% say it's good. 38% not so good. And nearly half, 46% of Republican primary voters say it's poor. And then we asked, what about your personal family financial situation? 60% of voters today say they're holding steady. Only 1 in 5, nearly a quarter, 22% say they're getting ahead, and 16% say they're actually falling behind, Anderson.
David Challian, thanks so much. Immigration, the number one issue in this, according to David. Also so interesting to hear from that voter, Max. Also, we heard from somebody else. Both of those voters didn't really blink an eye at the charges that the former president is facing.
Well, it's fascinating. I mean, and we tend to be reductive in how we look at voters, so we actually hear from some of them. This was somebody who could have been, frankly, a Trump campaign surrogate. He was so enthusiastic about Donald Trump, but he did allude to if there was a conviction that could change the course for him. That's going to be the main thing to watch in this after this race gets locked up, is how many of these diehard supporters who love the Trump years could still be with him if he's, in fact, a convicted felon.
Yeah, we got to watch him kind of actually think about it on camera, right? Like, consider it. And he said it would have a serious impact. And, you know, I think this is really the thing that, you know, when I talk to some of you at this table or other Republican sources, this is what they all worry about. No one knows. But if it happens, the answer is really unclear, and Democrats feel very,
and that may have an impact on a general election. But let's be clear: there's not going to be a guilty verdict or any verdict before Donald Trump becomes the nominee of the Republican Party. He's going to clinch that before there's ever a verdict in any of these cases. So, you know, we'll see if when everybody puts on their the blue uniform and the red uniform, how the whole thing sorts out.
This immigration poll that David Chalian put up, this is coming on the heels of the congressional inaction on it, also on the heels of what Biden has said about it. This week, the Gallup poll had Biden at his worst ever number on immigration, -39, severely underwater. And I'll tell you what Republicans are buzzing about today, and I'm not surprised to see this number so high, is the death of the college student in Georgia, Laken Riley. There is a suspect who is in custody, who is alleged to be in the country illegally. Republicans are on fire about this. And so generally, from a policy perspective, and now you have this murder going on in Georgia, I think you're going to continue to see this immigration number go up and up.
The thing that shocked me was the economy number that we pointed out, basically that you had entrants going in, just 16% say that their family is personally falling behind, even though more than 80% of them say the economy is just that bad. So there's this idea that somewhere out there, the economy is bad for people, Trump's going to make it better. But then when you say, are you okay? They're like, oh, yeah, I'm fine. But there's someone out there that needs help, and Trump is going to be the one to do it.
It is interesting that it's the top issue right here in South Carolina, although I think the economy and immigration sometimes get tied up together, like voters conflate them.
I think one of the... Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say, first of all, as somebody who's also accidentally broken the law, I was happy to hear
There's someone waiting for you out
there. This seemed to me like just more evidence that Tip O'Neill's old phrase that all politics is local is at least over for the foreseeable future. Politics is all nationalized. Everything is nationalized. Immigration, I'm sure there are problems with immigration in South Carolina, but that's really a national media-driven response. When, as Audie says, when basically 82% say they're doing fine or better under Biden, but they still think the economy stinks, that's because they're getting national messaging, and it's not really about their real
One
lives.
of the things that was fascinating to me is just listening to Max, and Max listed the things that matter to him first. And I think this is what jumps out to most people watching who are not stuck in this kind of vacuum that we live in, that he said it was faith and family. And that's why he came out and supported Donald Trump. And for me, and many voters, and many just people who watch this process, that doesn't match up with who we know Donald Trump to be. Somebody who was found liable of sexual assault, somebody who has 5 kids by 3 different baby mamas. I mean, this is when you go to South Carolina and you're talking to voters, particularly in the upstate, where you have Pickens, Oconee, Greenville, Spartanburg, which is going to decide this race tonight. And you have these evangelicals, you have the Bob Jones universities, and you look at them and you say, and if you just give them a blank slate, you don't even mention Donald Trump's names, but you look at the facts behind the man and who he is, stiffing workers, et cetera, when he was developing here in New York, and you say, would you vote for this person? The answer is no. And so I do think that when you look at how nationalized these elections have become, it's something that is making these evangelical voters just push Donald Trump's button, and it doesn't make any sense.
I also think it's... Go ahead, Van.
And also, I think that part of it is about Trump's strength, his ability to kind of remarket himself. It's not just about Trump's strength, it's about Biden's weakness. Nobody's scared of Biden. They're not afraid to put up against Biden somebody who's got 159 gazillion felonies and all these different things. And so there's a dynamic here where someone like him who believes this, Max, he believes in faith and family, he still thinks Trump can beat this guy. And that's a big part of the problem here.
I want to check in with Brian Todd, who's with a voter for Nikki Haley. Brian?
Right, Anderson. Thanks very much. We have Sam Blackman here. Sam has lived here his entire life in this area of South Carolina, and he voted for Nikki Haley as governor, but voted for Donald Trump as president. We've encountered a few people today who've had that dynamic. What made you, I guess, change from voting for her as governor to voting for Trump for president?
Well, I feel like Trump would just have a whole lot stronger stand, and we need that right now because we're going in the wrong direction right now for sure, and we need to be a lot stronger around the world, not just around here.
In what way do you think we're going in the wrong direction and we need Donald Trump?
Well, I just feel like we look really soft to everybody else in the world, and I feel like that they're just, right now, a lot of other countries are taking advantage of us, and we're tired of being taken advantage of.
If Donald Trump is convicted in any of the cases that you know he's got some legal cases ahead, if he's convicted in any of them, would that change your mind?
Well, they've had a hard time convicting him of anything so far. I guess it would have to depend on what it was, but right now, probably not.
Sam, thanks for talking to us. Good to meet you. Thanks very much. Okay, take care. All right, guys, that's we've seen this a couple times, as I mentioned, people who voted for Nikki Haley for governor of South Carolina, but switching over to Donald Trump for the presidential vote. Kind of an interesting dynamic there. We're heading into the final few minutes before polls close here. One quick vignette here. We had a teenage voter come through here a short time ago, and when that person cast his vote, one of the election officials here said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a first-time voter." Everybody applauded. They say that's a tradition here. So that was kind of a nice thing to witness a few minutes ago. Back to you.
That's cool. Brian Todd, thanks so much. Come back to you a little bit later on. Scott, you wanted to respond to something that...
Yeah, Bakar, you were talking about the evangelical number and the voter that we talked to. I think the answer to your question is these voters aren't electing a church pastor. They wouldn't tell you that they're electing Donald Trump to be a moral role model. They believe they are electing someone
I'm sorry, Scott.
to stand out.
We flash back to the 90s and Bill Clinton. Like, what happened? Like, what happened?
Well, first of all, our party is now made up of mid-90s Democrats. That's true. That's who inhabits my party now. So I guess it makes some sense. But the reality is, they think evangelical Christendom, everyone is in an existential crisis, that our entire culture is stacked against it and is trying to destroy it and their values, and they're looking for someone to stand outside and guard the church door, not stand inside and give a sermon.
You're correct. And Donald Trump does one thing extremely well, something better than we've seen any candidate running for president in recent history, which is to engage in these culture wars and win them. But that also comes with some downsides to the moral fabric of this country. We're having a conversation about morality. I mean, Donald Trump uses racism as political currency, and we've seen those things. And so that is where you have this clash, and we're going to see people come out with fever for Donald Trump and against Donald Trump.
Voting ends in South Carolina very soon at 7 p.m. Eastern. We're awaiting the first results from polling places across the state and our first chance to potentially project the winner. Much more ahead. Stay with us.
Voting is winding down in the South Carolina Republican presidential primary. We are nearing the top of the hour when polling places close, and we get our first chance to potentially project a winner. We could soon learn if former president and GOP frontrunner Donald Trump is going to continue his winning streak and get a big victory, the one that he's banking on, or if former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley pulls off a surprise in her home state after escalating her attacks on Trump and insisting she's in the race for the long haul. With just minutes left to vote, let's check in with our correspondents. They're at key polling places. First to Omar Jimenez in Malden, South Carolina. Omar, what's happening there as the polls close?
I think winding down is the key word. We've seen rushes, we've seen lulls. This, at the end of the day, is what I would call a lull. But obviously, voters would come in here. You see those familiar privacy booths. We've got hundreds that have been voting here. 532 is the count so far. And then we just got the number in. Around 66,000 have voted in this county, Greenville County. We've been talking to voters over the course of the day. We've heard a wide range of opinions, as you can imagine. And I want to introduce you to one of those voters, Kalani, excuse me. Great to see you. Tell me who you voted for and why.
So I voted for Nikki Haley. While myself, I'm not a Republican. I mainly wanted to kind of shift the narrative, especially with like the Republican Party, and not allowing someone who I don't believe should be on the ballot to not be on the ballot. So I didn't vote in the Democratic primary just because I didn't see the need to, and I thought it'd be more beneficial to vote in this one so that I could get Nikki Haley on there, because, I mean, truthfully speaking, I do like her as a person, even though I'm not a Republican myself and necessarily don't agree with everything that they're trying to push for. Out of everyone that was on the ballot listing, I believe that at least her morally and ethically, I do like a lot more.
Yeah. And, you know, for background, everyone, here in South Carolina, it is an open primary, so you don't have to vote for your specific party. You can vote for anyone you want. You just can't vote twice. And there was low turnout in the Democratic primary where Joe Biden swept pretty heavily. So there are a lot of folks like her who did not vote in the Democratic primary. Just based on people that you've spoken to, do you feel like Nikki Haley has a chance here?
You know, I was actually really surprised because this time last year when they were kind of announcing who was going to be on the ballot, I mean, especially in this area that we live in, it's not a secret that a lot of people do love Trump. But I was actually surprised to see that she's been doing really well and people are actually pushing for her. which was surprising, but also like a good surprise. I wouldn't be angry per se if she was the one to win, but I think it is really cool to see how I think especially my younger generation are pushing for her more and kind of gaining opinions on their own and not just following what their parents' opinions were. And so I'm glad to see that she's actually doing a lot better than most people thought she was going to do.
Yeah. Well, we will see. Kalani, great to meet you. Obviously, you know, a big hill to climb here in South Carolina for the former governor, but she's not the first person we've spoken to today that held off on their Democratic primary vote to vote against the former president in this primary. That said, at this particular polling location and in this county that Trump is carried by double digits in the general elections of 2020 and 2016, there have been many Trump voters we've spoken to as well, kind of hiding the divide we've got here.
All right, Omar Jimenez, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Now let's go to Boris Sanchez. He's in Rock Hill, South Carolina. Boris, set the scene for us in these final minutes of voting.
One voter just walked through the door, Jake, just minutes to go here. The election workers very closely watching the clock as that voter gets her ID checked, she gets her ballot, and she gets a chance to vote in the Republican primary. We want to step outside to abide by election rules and speak to a voter that's been waiting to chat with us. Tabitha, very nice to meet you. You supported former President Donald Trump in the primary. Tell us why.
I just really love the different things that he's done for our country. I do know that there's a lot of controversy with how he's treated people or how he's acted, but as a Christian, I think that he's done really incredible things that stand by the values that I hold as a believer. And so, yes.
Any concerns about the criminal charges that he's facing and how they could impact the general election?
No, I think that it's really hard being a young person trying to get a hold of information in the news because there's so many voices, and so it's really hard to know what to believe, and there's so many theories and stuff. And so I try to do my best to know what I can, but I definitely don't know everything.
So Nikki Haley was a very popular governor here in South Carolina. She served multiple terms. Did you have a moment where you thought about voting for her?
I did definitely look into her. One of the things that I found about her was that she didn't like her husband's name, and so she changed it to Michael. And Michael's a great name. It's my husband's name. But the, of character that has in someone of not accepting who they are, I didn't super love that. But, I mean, that's obviously just a super personal thing. There is other...
Do you think she should drop out of the race or keep trying?
For future elections?
I mean, in this race, in the primary, she has said that she's going to stay in until every ballot is counted. Do you think she should drop out and let Donald Trump be the nominee?
Oh, I definitely think that it'd be good to continue on unless it's something that's a threat to something. If, you know, I don't know, but I think it would be great to continue. I definitely don't believe in giving up, so.
Tabitha, thank you so much for chatting with us. We appreciate you sharing your perspective. So, Jake, as you've heard now from multiple folks that we've spoken to, a number of Trump supporters out here in Rock Hill. It's an area where the former president campaigned last night. His campaign, according to folks that I've spoken to that are close to the campaign, to really help him win big in South Carolina. Jake.
All right, Boris, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Let's go over to the Magic Wall. Again, somebody else of faith. The voter that we're talking to, and again, that voter of faith talking about how she supports Donald Trump and she was really happy with his presidency. Probably a lot of that, I'm guessing, but also based on polls and research, probably a lot of that has to do with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which Donald Trump is responsible for those 3 Supreme Court justices he appointed.
And all the federal judges below the Supreme Court level. That was one of the legacies, like it or not, watching at home, of the Trump presidency. They did a fantastic job, by his perspective, in getting dozens and dozens and dozens of conservative federal judges on the bench, including, as you noted, those 3 Supreme Court justices. David Chalian mentioned earlier, more than 6 in 10 voters, I believe today, say they are evangelical Christians. You find a lot of them up here. Boris is here in Rock Hill. You find, this is called the Bible Belt area up here. You find them all across the state, don't get me wrong, but you find them in much larger numbers, percentages up here, which is where turnout will matter. So what are we going to watch for? We're going to be counting votes in 4 minutes. 3-4 minutes we'll be counting votes. So that's where Boris was, right up here. York County, it's the 7th largest county. Charlotte is right here. This is an area that has been growing up here. I wouldn't call it quite the Charlotte suburbs, but it has been growing. And again, if Nikki Haley is going to find higher educated, more affluent voters to help her, this would be a place. But in my travels there, and you're hearing it from our correspondents as they interview voters, this is Trump's party now, even though she is the former governor. But we look here in the middle part of the state. I didn't mention this when you were here earlier. Richland County, excuse me. This is where the state capital is, Columbia. There are 46 counties in South Carolina, and I'll show you the map in a minute. Donald Trump carried all but 2. Richland was one of them. Marco Rubio won Richland and Charleston. Nikki Haley was for Marco Rubio in 2016, worth remembering. But Trump was the hostile insurgent then, trying to take over the party, and yet he won 44 of 46 counties in South Carolina when he was the new guy and the insurgent. So even then, he was popular in the state. If Nikki Haley is going to have a chance, she has to win Richland County, and I would argue she has to win it quite big, second largest population-wise. But to the voters we've been hearing from tonight, Jake, this is Greenville County. You were talking to one of our correspondents there earlier. It's 10% of the state population. This here is the more southern part of the state, if you will. Georgia, Alabama. Here, this is very evangelical country, and Donald Trump expects and is counting on running it up very big right here. Governor Haley has campaigned out here trying to blunt that. Again, we can stop talking about polling now because we're going to be counting votes in 2 or 3 minutes. But the key part of the place for Governor Haley is here. This is what in South Carolina, especially Charleston County, they call it the Low Country. And you get down here, you're along the coast, it's gorgeous, it's beautiful, it's historic, it's more affluent, it is less Trumpy. But again, I spent some time here a couple of weeks ago. The former Governor Mark Sanford, no Trump fan, lost his job in Congress because he disagreed with Trump sometimes, still expects Haley to win and expects Trump to win and win big. I was just texting with someone I used to know when he lived here, moved down here, wants to vote for Haley because he thinks Trump is a bad role model for his children, just finished voting, says he thinks Trump is going to win. So when you look at the map, it is let's do the 2016 map just so you can see it, because it just jumps out at me when you look here and come back to the 2016. This was when Donald Trump was the new guy, right? When he was the new guy. It's only 33%.
Right. This is the primary. This is not against Joe Biden. This is against Rubio and Cruz.
And everybody else left in the race at that point. And Marco Rubio won here, and Marco Rubio won here. So everyone says, oh, but Nikki Haley was the former governor. She last ran in 2014. This is 2016. And so since then, this has become Donald Trump's party without a doubt. This is the 2016 primary map. Let's come back to tonight and see what we're looking for. We're going to get votes any minute now. Number one, Donald Trump's expecting a big win. Number two, if he gets that big win, he will do something that is simply unprecedented in a contested primary. He won Iowa. He won New Hampshire. He won Nevada. He won all of those pretty big margins. He's expecting a very healthy margin here. In the end, Jake, the game is about delegates. 50 at play tonight. Donald Trump expects to get most. Some people think he could get them all.
All right, polling places are about to close in South Carolina. 5 seconds left in the GOP presidential primary fight between Donald Trump and Nikki Haley. And right now, we can make a major projection. CNN projects that Donald Trump will win the South Carolina Republican primary, defeating former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley in her home state and securing his 4th major early victory in the GOP primary season. The former president taking another critical step toward winning his 3rd Republican presidential nomination and continuing his dominance over the race ahead of the all-important and delegate-rich Super Tuesday contests just 10 days from now. We're able to make this projection based on exit polls that CNN and other news organizations conducted with thousands of South Carolina voters after they cast their ballots. Again, CNN is projecting Donald Trump will be the winner of the South Carolina Republican primary. Let's go to CNN's Kristen Holmes at Trump headquarters in Columbia, South Carolina. Kristen, what is the mood there after this news, this very quick CNN projection?
Well, actually, they're just starting to hear it now. You can hear people cheering behind me. This is not unexpected. Donald Trump and his team had expected that he would win. The question, of course, being how large is that margin going to be? The recent polls had her up roughly 30 points. Now, we are told that Donald Trump is going to come out shortly and speak to thank all of his supporters here, and he will be on a plane back to Florida later tonight. Now, again, as you noted, as John noted, this is a sweep for Donald Trump. It is all 4 early states by huge, healthy margins. And what they're hoping that this does, you can hear people cheering now. They're getting the news behind me. There's a lot of excitement. But they're hoping what this does is with this 4th win, particularly here in South Carolina, that this is going to help urge Republicans who are on the fence, who believe that there might be an alternative to Donald Trump, to get behind the former president. They also hope that this will help with some of those holdout donors. What they really want to be doing now is pivoting to the general election, building out their campaign in various states, particularly, I'm told, Arizona, Georgia and Michigan. Now, it's harder to do that if he is still competing against Nikki Haley, but that's what they are hoping to do. They were also hoping a huge margin here might put more pressure on the former South Carolina governor, because this is her former home state, because this is another state that she has lost, to drop out of the race. However, as you have reported, as we have continued to say, Haley says she is not going to drop out until every primary ballot has been cast. It is, again, though, it looks like the Republican Party has really started to come around completely for the former president as he wins this fourth early voting state.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Kristen Holmes. And let us mark this moment. And first of all, this is Nikki Haley's home state, and we are calling this race for Donald Trump the moment that the polls close, meaning it is a decisive victory for Donald Trump over her in her home state. That's one. Two, no non-incumbent has ever done this. 4 primaries and caucuses in a row. This really does show the dominance of Donald Trump when it comes to the modern Republican primary. It is essentially as if he is the incumbent president as far as these voters are concerned.
Yeah, I mean, I think he is essentially the incumbent for the Republican Party. Nikki Haley knew that coming into this, and that's why a lot of people thought she might want to avoid an embarrassing moment in her home state by leaving the race before that. But it almost seems like something had changed for her between New Hampshire and between South Carolina. The question is, what exactly is it? She's standing her ground, saying she wants to stay in it. She seems personally deeply offended, especially because Trump has personally attacked her and her family. Where else does that go for her? And could this be a candidacy that might be less about how to challenge Trump in the primary and more about what is she going to say about Trump for the benefit of voters writ large? I don't know that Nikki Haley knows the answer to that question just yet, but increasingly that is going to be what people are talking about.
Yeah, I mean, we're already hearing from her team the arguments about why she isn't going to go anywhere, arguing that on Super Tuesday, 11 of the 16 states have open or semi-open primaries, meaning people who are not traditional Republicans or registered Republicans can vote in those primaries. But as Lindsey Graham said earlier on this program, he called her a friend, but he basically said, to what end? And the answer to that question is, from her perspective still, is I want to stay in the race. I want to give people a choice. And until and unless she stops getting money in her coffers in order to do that, it's hard to see how she's going to change.
I mean, she can stay in the race as long as she wants,
can.
but eventually the delegate math is going to be too much for her. The Trump team believes by mid-March or so, that's when she'll be effectively eliminated. And look, there is some precedent for candidates who have no chance of winning, staying in the race. Bernie Sanders did that, of course, against Hillary Clinton for some time. Of course, and the Hillary people kind of blamed him for costing her the race. Well,
Hillary Clinton did it to Barack Obama.
Exactly. So that can certainly continue to play on.
She was winning some races, though, we should note. Yeah.
Very good point. But what's also interesting here is that just how nothing seems to have stuck against Donald Trump. All the things that he's said, whether it's about inviting NATO countries to be attacked by Russia if they did not pay their dues, criticizing Nikki Haley's deployed husband, killing the bipartisan immigration, the border security deal, even as voters in this state say immigration is the number one issue for them. None of these things worked, and we're seeing Donald Trump have a resounding victory here.
Yeah, and I'm really interested to see his approach when he speaks tonight. Because remember the last time he gave a major speech in New Hampshire, he certainly didn't give the speech that his aides wanted him to give. Now, that was because he spoke after Nikki Haley, and she really, because she, from his perspective, sounded like she was giving a victory speech. He went very, very far off script. You heard, again, Graham say he hopes that he gives effectively a magnanimous speech.
Yeah, he said gracious.
Gracious speech. Thank you. We'll see what happens. But that will sort of set the direction or the tone of what we are going to see, at least in the next couple of days.
Yeah. I'd ask someone close to the Trump campaign about what is the feeling inside the campaign about Nikki Haley. And I was surprised to hear that it wasn't as negative as one would expect, given how the two have been really at it these last few weeks. It'll be interesting to see how far he goes, because remember after Iowa, he tried to kind of give this olive branch thing.
Donald Trump is speaking. Big night for him. Let's listen in.
An even bigger win than we anticipated, and I was just informed that we got double the number of votes that has ever been received in the great state of South Carolina. So that's pretty good. So it's a record ×2, and there's something going on in the country. Some really great things are going on. You look outside and you see all of the horror. You see millions and millions of people coming across the border illegally. We don't know where they come from. They come from jails. They come from prisons. They come from all sorts of places that we don't want to know. They come from mental institutions and insane asylums. And we don't want that in our country. We're not going to stand for it. We're not going to stand for it. You have terrorists coming in. You have people coming in that we just can't. We can't do this. No country could sustain what's happening to the United States of America. No country. So we're going to straighten things out. The border is the worst it's ever been. You know, in 2016 we won, and we had a bad border, and I talked about the border a lot. Talked about it a lot. And I said, we're going to fix it. We're going to fix it. We fixed it very quickly. And in 2020, we couldn't talk about it, although we did get millions of more votes a second time. But now there's a spirit that I have never seen. We ran 2 great races, but there's never been, there's never been a spirit like this. And I just want to say that I have never seen the Republican Party so unified as it is right now. Never been like this. And a big part of that is the people standing behind me. These are the biggest officials in South Carolina, but I say like the biggest officials in our country as far as I'm concerned. They're state figures, but they're national figures, and in the truest sense of the word, they love our country so much, and they want to see our country succeed and be respected again. Right now, we're a laughingstock all over the world. Our country is going to be respected again, respected like never before. So this is a fantastic evening. It's an early evening and a fantastic. So you can all go down and you can celebrate for about 15 minutes, and we have to get back to work because the big date, you know, Michigan's coming up. We're doing great. The auto workers are going to be with us 100% because they got sold out by this country. But Michigan's up, and we're going to have a tremendous success there. And then we have a thing called Super Tuesday, and I think we're leading 91-7 overall. If you don't mind, may I have the pleasure of introducing some incredible people? Because they stuck right from the beginning, from the very moment we announced, and they believe in make America great again. That's what they believe in. They believe in America first. We're putting America first. First of all, my family, Melania, Barron, Don Jr. and Kimberly, Ivanka and Jared, Tiffany and Michael. They're so supportive. So supportive of me, and we really appreciate it and love them. They're great. We have a great family, and we have incredible friends, and we're going to be up here on November 5th, and we're going to look at Joe Biden, and we're going to look him right in the eye. He's destroying our country, and we're going to say, Joe, you're fired. Get out. Get out, Joe. You're fired. They're destroying our country, and we're going to... I just wish we could do it quicker. 9 months is a long time. I just wish we could do it quicker, Mr. Governor. I wish is there anything you can do with your vast powers to make that, you know, in certain countries, you're allowed to call your election date. If I had the right to do it, I'd do it tomorrow. I'd say, we're having an election tomorrow. Henry, is there anything you can do? I want to start off because right from the beginning, Henry McMaster, the governor of this incredible state, and much more importantly, his wife, Peggy, she's with him all the way, I'll tell you. Never saw anything. What a couple. But I'd like to ask him to say a few words. He's a very special man, an incredible governor, very popular in the state. And really, I mean, he gave us some very good advice. And he has right from the beginning. You know, from the day I announced, I had the lieutenant governor. He was the lieutenant governor. And from right at the beginning, when I announced, then I said, I don't know the gentleman. Is he good? They said, he's really great. I said, well, I hope so. And you know what? Within about 2 weeks, I said, that guy is unbelievable. You know, I never got the support of the governor. She supported somebody else, but I had the support of somebody much, much better, Henry McMaster, and we won in a landslide. And I'd like to ask the governor to say a few words. Please, Henry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be very brief. Y'all, I would like you all to remember this moment that you were here. This is a great moment in American history. We will probably never see another one like it. Every time a rocket launches, you know, it goes up slow and then it's climbing and climbing and then boom, that next stage comes off and it goes. Well, we just did that. We just hit maximum velocity and we're going all the way.
So I'm going to ask somebody else to say, because he came on board and Lindsey wanted him and the lieutenant governor wanted him and everybody wanted him. Henry and Peggy wanted him. So I thought he was okay, but he didn't love speaking about himself because he's a good person. See, I have no problem with that. It's a problem. What a personality, I don't know. But he endorsed me, and then we asked him to go and do a few shows, and, you know, they're not often nice shows. They're very hostile. And what he did was, I said, is this the same man? And he campaigned nicely, but he's a high-quality person. When he was supporting me, the day, is that correct, Lindsey, when he went out, yeah. Tim Scott, Senator Tim Scott, he went out and he was ripping it. I said, what happened to Tim Scott? What a dynamo. And he has been one of our great advocates. He's been doing things that have been unbelievable. And I'm just very happy he didn't have that same energy, drive, because I think I probably would have been out of the race a long time ago. But I want to say, a very special man. I really do mean it. So many people have such great respect for him, and you're very lucky to have him in the state. Tim, please, say a few words.
Hello, South Carolina! The longer I speak, the less you hear of him. So let me just ask one survey question, and you better answer it loud and clear. Is South Carolina Trump country?
Thank you very much, Tim. Really great job. Amazing. Another man, not a lot of people know him. He doesn't do too much television. He happens to be a little bit further left than some of the people on the stage. But I always say, when I'm in trouble on the left, I call up Lindsey Graham, and he straightens it out so fast. And I'll tell you, no, remember. I love him. He's a good man. Come up here, Lindsey. Come up here, Lindsey. Come here.
Okay, are you ready? America, the nightmare you're facing is just about over. Help is on the way. This is the most qualified man to be president of the United States. And let it be said that South Carolina created the biggest political comeback in American history.
Thank you, Lindsey. So, I have a son who's a very talented guy, and he works so hard, and we love him, and his wife is very good. She goes on, and Laura. And I want to thank Eric and Laura for doing such a fantastic job, and really amazing. They're amazing people. Let's go down a little list of some of the people that are up here tonight, because every one of them is a star in their own right. And your lieutenant governor is going places. You do know that, right? Pamela Evans.
Been listening to former President Donald Trump giving his victory speech, overwhelming results in South Carolina. We called it right at the top of the hour as soon as the polls close. Back to the team here in New York. Listen, you've heard a lot of Trump speeches.
Yeah, I mean, RIP the Reagan GOP. There's something so jarring about watching Lindsey Graham and Tim Scott, all of who condemned him after January 6th, lining up to do their best campaign rally impersonation and saying this is the most qualified man to be president.
The night of January 6th, Lindsey Graham was saying he was,
I'm done with
Enough.
him.
Enough.
I mean, listen, it is the greatest political comeback in history. Just 3 years ago, he was done in the party, and it only took a matter of months before he came back and handily won in Nikki Haley's home state. The question now becomes this. She's held on, we'll see where the margins break down tonight, to about just under a third of Republican votes in some of these primaries. How many of those votes will go to Donald Trump? Because he will need those in a general election. Some of those are never going to be with him, but how many is the open question now?
Look, I mean, for me, Tim Scott is obviously auditioning to be vice president. And every time Trump just ritually humiliates him, talks about him having low energy, makes fun of his campaign, and then Tim Scott gets out there and he tries to do something that's really not natural to him, and then he walks off. But, we were talking about before, this is kind of the pathway that Pence got on. And so you might not just be watching the resurrection of a Tim Scott, but you might also be watching the rise of resurrection of Trump, the rise of Tim Scott.
I cannot think of a Republican that I want to be vice president more than Tim Scott.
Sure.
We love Tim Scott. Yeah. All Republicans of all stripes love Tim Scott. And I agree with what Donald Trump said. I think he's a good man.
Yes.
And I think he's a humble man. And I want him to do whatever he has to do to get this job. I really do, because I think
You're in luck.
I
think he is.
He
does seem willing. You should feel good.
Your wish will be granted, sir. You all are down on what is going on here, but politics has become performative, and he is doing what he has to do. And if he is on this ticket, Republicans are going to love it. They're going to love it. So I'm glad to see him going all around.
Tim Scott is I firmly believe Tim Scott is a good man.
Yes.
I've said that many times before. My line about Tim Scott is that I would give Tim Scott a kidney if he asked me, but I'd never vote for him, right? But the person that Tim Scott has become while auditioning, you call it auditioning, I'd probably call it something else if I was just talking to Audie and Van and we were in a room by ourselves. But what he's doing right now is embarrassing. And I think this is not the Tim Scott that we know. But you also see this happen with many men and women who actually find themselves in this Trump orbit. I mean, this is not who Lindsey Graham, we knew Lindsey Graham to be before.
He wouldn't even show his face in Munich this time, after years and years going with John McCain to the conference that celebrates the NATO alliance. He wouldn't even show up.
And thank you. That bolsters the point that I'm making. And you're seeing a shell of who Tim Scott really is. He's not the rah-rah, this is Trump country, woo-ha, let's go do this. I mean, and at the end of the day, I mean, what does he get from this? I mean,
maybe the vice presidency.
Maybe, but if he misses, what is he, HUD director?
He's a U.S. senator from South Carolina and one of the most respected Republicans in the country.
But he's losing.
But
he's losing. No, not either way. My point, and I think Van's point and everybody else's point, is that you're losing respect day by day by going out here and auditioning.
There is a segment of lifelong Republicans who are mortified by what Tim Scott's doing. We are definitely the minority. You're absolutely right, Scott. But there are some of us who are like, we thought you were one of the good ones. We thought you were going to tell the truth. I want to know his answer to certifying the election question. That's fundamental.
Subjugation is the toll you have to pay when you enter Trump's world. You have to subjugate yourself. The whole party is subjugating itself to Donald Trump.
Yeah, which is why, I understand the point about making it it's embarrassing that there's a black guy doing this. A lot of white guys are doing it too, right? And on Alyssa's point, I agree with that. I know a lot of conservatives and Republicans who wince when they see some of, particularly the New Hampshire victory speech thing where he came on and after Vivek Ramaswamy and really did not cover himself in glory. Where I disagree a little bit with Alyssa and where I think it's sort of significant here that Nikki Haley stays in is I really think the future of American politics is going to be the future of factions. And I miss the days, we were better off when the Democratic Party had really strong and robust competing factions where they had to negotiate with each other. Republican Party desperately needs that. What Nikki Haley staying in the race does, I mean, there are a lot of things it does, but one of the things it does is it solidifies and gives permission structure for a big chunk of the Republican Party to be a non-Trump faction. And since Trump is not going to appoint a single person in his second administration to be a check on him, not one, who could successfully do it. There are going to be no Barrs and Kellys or any of that kind of people. The only way to hold him in check is to have a constituency in the Republican Party that will punish senators and congressmen who don't push back on some of the crazy.
Can I ask a question, though? But can she actually do that, or is she the leader or creator of this mold that's a faction? If, for example, tonight, to David's point, she doesn't even do well in the 1st Congressional District, which is the most moderate, which is it's Charleston, it's Berkeley, it's Dorchester, it's where you would think somebody like Nikki Haley can do well. If she gets bludgeoned there, and then disregard the rest of the state, can she be the leader of this?
Yes, sir. My only point, pushing back on what Alyssa said when she said RIP to the Reagan GOP, my point is it's sort of like Miracle Max. It's only mostly dead. And the way you build it back is by building up a faction like this.
Can I get a couple of points? I want to ask you a question, but, it's the language is so funny because you could say the same words and they can mean something completely different. Nikki Haley says, I'm not going anywhere. And the Trump folks are saying, you're not going anywhere. They're saying the same thing, but it's really, really different. My question to you is if she says in the near term, yes, when I raised my hand and said that I would vote for Trump even if he were convicted, can she be the leader of that faction? Do you have to pay that toll in order to be the leader of the faction?
I think it'll be really hard. And I should say, full disclosure, my wife used to work for Nikki Haley. I know Nikki Haley. I have no connection to her now. I think it would be really hard. It'd be really hard to say the things that she's been saying and then endorse them. But at the same time, like in 1976, Reagan ran, he didn't win, and he created a faction. That's the history of the GOP. Is the team.
What do you think she says? What does she say
it's
tonight?
Their term next time.
What does Nikki Haley come out and say tonight?
I don't know. This sounds like fan fiction to me. I'm sorry. I just two things. One, I don't think there's anyone who is supportive of Trump right now that doesn't want to be there. I don't think that Tim Scott feels he's subjugating himself any more than Elise Stefanik does at CPAC right now. The era where there were people who kind of went along to get along to be in office is over. If you are on stage with Trump right now, I do think you are along because you want to be there. And Tim Scott has been performing a necessary action for Trump, who is always trying to show, I'm not that racist, right? That's like always the argument. And he represents that, just like Vivek Ramaswamy did. The other thing is we're looking at South Carolina like it's the same South Carolina from a year ago, even though it's had explosive growth from both red and blue states. Yeah. But Republicans from those states, which means the people who are going there are not the people who knew her before. And if anything, they're probably Trump supporters from other states. It's part of our cultural self-sorting. I don't think the rump state you're talking about of Republicans is just going to rise up this election. It sounds like it's a years-long project.
Yeah, it is.
And I don't think...
I'm not talking about anything for 2024. I'm talking about the future of the Republican Party.
Well, and Anderson, you asked what Nikki Haley has to do tonight. I have to say, I'm hearing from my Republican sources who are basically saying, look, she now is potentially going to pay a price for staying in to her own political future, whatever that may be, especially if this is...
But didn't you hear people saying, we still like her, it's just not her time? I didn't hear people saying she's excommunicated.
If she stays in and continues to run against Trump, I think that there is going to be... I'm just picking up this sense that there are going to be more people...
Trump did himself harm in New Hampshire when he stood up and behaved as badly as he did in a moment of triumph, just, acting like a jerk. And I think he tried to avoid that tonight. I wouldn't mistake that for the idea that they'll all be cool if she hangs around too long.
I mean, she's now running to be president of I Told You So. I mean, the faction you're talking about is predicated on Trump winning the nomination, losing the presidency, and then she gives a speech and says, I told you. That's the fact.
I'm an I told you so guy. I've been fighting myself for 6 years.
Alyssa, then we're going to go back.
There is a reality where we could have a conviction of Donald Trump come down late summer, and I think Nikki Haley wants to stay in the race to be the person who's been raising money, raising her name ID, talking to both sides of the party, and the person who's pulling the best head-to-head against Donald Trump.
It is insane to think that the party is going to turn
to Nikki
Haley
now. That is the strategy that does not work. The RNC will turn their back on her in a heartbeat because she challenged Donald Trump.
And all these delegates are going to be Trump delegates, too. I mean, this idea that you can go to the convention and say, oh, look, I have these delegates in my corner, and I've also managed to anger all of the other delegates in the room. The math just doesn't work.
I think one of the things we're doing for Nikki is we're actually lowering the bar as we go around because she just got pummeled in her home state. And I understand about the explosive growth in South Carolina. That is true, particularly in the Low Country and around the York County area. But the fact remains that the fundamentals of South Carolina are still the same. I mean, when you look at the upstate, I mean, it still is uber Christian conservative evangelicals. I mean, that is South Carolina. Even with all these folk that are coming from Indiana and Ohio, it's the same type of voter. I mean, we don't have a new type of voter that's emerging in South Carolina. And she was a two-term governor. I mean, winning an election in 2014 and getting beat here in 2024, that is not that long ago. I mean, we're not talking about somebody who came in with no record.
Jay, it wasn't long ago that she was saying, I can't wait to get back to my sweet state of South Carolina.
It was the
not so sweet.
But one more point. I mean, she also abandoned Nevada, and she ran a good gubernatorial campaign for the past month during this primary cycle, but she just couldn't do it. So my point is, I don't think the future for Nikki Haley is bright when this happens in South Carolina.
But that also means the future for the Republican Party is not bright, and maybe the future for the country is not bright. You have a Republican Party now that has abandoned the border. This is what you're voting for now. When it comes to immigration, you screamed fire year one. You spread the fire year two by sending immigrants all over the place. You stop the fire trucks, and then you try to run on immigration, and nobody is challenging that. You abandoned Ukraine. Here you have a military state, and you have Ukrainians losing cities, losing ground, and the only Republican in the country saying, for God's sake, do not abandon democracy. For God's sake, do not abandon Ukrainians to Putin's butchers, is Nikki Haley. And she just got destroyed in a military state. Yeah. That is not just bad for Nikki Haley's future and whatever. It's bad for the Republican Party and for the United States of America.
And also, to Jonah's point about the idea that there's going to be this kind of faction that rises up and, like, can be a check on the party in the Congress. I mean, the primary election system and the way these districts are is built for the opposite.
Oh, I
agree.
agree.
It is built to, like, take those people down one by one. I mean, look at Liz Cheney, right? She's like the prime example of that.
Why I want to get rid of the primaries.
Even if Donald Trump were to lose the election and the whole party have to resort itself, I just don't see how the party recovers from what it's become.
Adi said you thought people are up there because they want to be up there. I think people are up there because the reality of Republican politics today, they feel demands them being up there if they want to get reelected, if they want to be vice president. 100%. I mean, power has having been on both sides of this thing.
I get it, but there's a lot of House lawmakers who are headed for the exits. There's been people who have been spiritually excommunicated.
Right.
I do think we've witnessed a purge, and a lot of the people who are there are the people who want to be there.
But it is a fact
because they don't want to be purged.
It is a fact that someone like Tim Scott, with his eyes closed, alone at night, would admit that he would rather Nikki Haley be the GOP nominee than Donald Trump.
That is your judgment. I don't know what he's doing at night. I'm just saying.
But most elected Republicans, if they were being honest with themselves, would want Nikki Haley, but they know that the power mechanisms are behind Donald Trump, and their power and future hinges on that.
But you act like Donald Trump has the ability to just make these things happen independent of what the voters want. Tim Scott's constituents,
well, that's
his party in South Carolina, everybody that votes for him, and most of the people he encounters on a daily basis are saying, I really think we should do Trump again. So there is some aspect of politics here where these people have to respond to the people that they represent.
So wait, David, can I ask you a question about this? Because I just am having this, I'm wondering that if Trump himself goes away, the voters that are with him, right? Are they only with him?
Yes.
Are they not with the party? Because there was a little bit of this with Obama, right? There were a lot of people, voters in the country, who were with Obama, but they weren't going to be with any generic Democrat. Is the same thing going on here?
Well, look, I think that Trump is responding to things that he works the seams that he sees. He sees people anger. He sees people. He doesn't choose these issues because he's deeply contemplative about the problems facing America. He chooses those things that he thinks reflects the base that he can build, and he works at them, and he works at resentment, and he works at anger. Can someone else come along and do it as well as he? I think that's a questionable, but
I mean, we know that MAGA voters don't turn out in other races where he's not on the ticket, right?
Let's go back to Jake in D.C. Jake?
Thanks, Anderson. You know, one of the great things about these nights is that it's not about pundits, it's not about polls, it's about actual votes, and the actual votes are coming in. This is the delegate count as of right now, and for those keeping close track at home, you see Donald Trump's shot up because 29 delegates from South Carolina.
Right.
There are 50 delegates at stake tonight. 29 of them are awarded to the statewide winner. He has won South Carolina. He gets the 29. That's why I left this up, just so you could see this is impressive. Whether you like Donald Trump or don't like Donald Trump, he is 4-0. And yes, he's in some ways the incumbent Republican. However, this has just never been done. Never been done before.
On either side.
On either side. So it's a big deal. Like it or not, it just shows his resilience within the new made-over Trump Republican Party.
So let me just give the vote count if I can. So right now, with only 6% of the vote in, Donald Trump is up. He has 58.4% of the vote, 27,000 and change. He's 8,209 votes ahead of Nikki Haley, who has 41% of the vote, almost 20,000 votes. And one of the big things that we're looking for right now is, you talked about how the winner gets, of the 50 delegates in South Carolina, the winner automatically gets 29. That leaves 21. South Carolina has 7 congressional districts. Each one of those gets 3. And we're looking to see, is Nikki Haley going to get any of them?
All right, we're looking to see, and we're going to talk generally about it right now for this reason. We don't have enough votes yet, so we don't want to raise your expectations and say, oh, Nikki Haley's going to win 3 delegates here, maybe 3 more delegates there, because we simply don't have enough votes yet to be confident about within each congressional district. But I'll highlight it for you, the idea, and you can see it on the map. Your eyes don't lie to you right here. She is leading right now in 2 counties. These are not congressional districts. She is leading right now in 2 counties. One is here, Richland County, which is the home of the state capital, Columbia. Marco Rubio won this county. Donald Trump won 44 of the 46 counties the first time, 2016 Republican primary. Donald Trump won 44 of 46 back then. That's how strong he has been from the beginning in South Carolina. But this is one Rubio won, and then Governor Haley endorsed him. But again, she's at 64%, so that's a nice early lead. But we're only at a quarter of the vote. Early votes tend to come in first here. She did have an early voting operation in the state, she knows. So let's just wait and see if this holds in this county. Go ahead.
Do you have congressional districts up there?
I do have the congressional districts. I'll show you in just a second about that. I just want to come out here first, and I just want to raise the caution again. I'm going to come back here to Charleston County along the coast right here. Bakari was just talking about this. She's at 62% if you round that up, to 38 if you round that up. But the more important number at the moment is that. 2%. So again, you get some early votes most likely coming in here, and this essentially is a congressional district. The lines move a little bit. So if she holds this, if she holds this, she would get 3 delegates. There are again 50 total. So I'll come back out. I'm going to show you the congressional district map, but I'm going to show you with a huge caveat. We have a long way to go. We have a long way to go to count enough votes within the congressional district. But this is the map right here. And then you do it by congressional district, you see the lines, right? So at the moment, see where she was winning down here? The congressional district stretches up. So Trump is winning. She was winning in here. The congressional district stretches out. And so Trump is winning. So at the moment, as the results come in, she's not leading in any of the congressional districts.
Right, but this is early yet.
Right, this is early yet. So if you look at the map right now, it's a possibility, emphasis on possibility. Donald Trump could get all 50. If he wins all 7 congressional, he gets them all. But if you come back out to the actual vote, you do see, again, this congressional district goes up here to where you see the red. This congressional district stretches into some of these areas where you see red. So is it possible Nikki Haley could pick up some delegates? Yes. Is Trump going to get the overwhelming bulk of them? Absolutely, yes.
So one of the reasons I wanted to ask about the congressional districts is because I wanted you to know who represents these people, because in some of them, they're people that you probably have heard of if you're watching this on a Saturday night. Nancy Mace, Congresswoman Nancy Mace, represents the 1st Congressional District. That used to be represented by Mark Sanford after his scandal and before. It used to be represented by Joe Cunningham, and now it's represented by Nancy Mace, who Nikki Haley endorsed when Donald Trump was backing somebody against Nancy Mace in the primary 2 years ago. But Nancy Mace endorsed Donald Trump this time around.
So she doesn't get a primary.
Well, she won't have a primary, but she's also very enthusiastic.
Right. Well, she does have a primary. She's hoping for Trump's support.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
All right. In any case, that's one of the reasons. And then Columbia, is that Clyburn?
Come on up.
Does represent Columbia?
Come on up. He's more up from there.
Or see Greenville. Who represents Columbia? Do we know?
I don't have that.
We'll have that answer for you in a second, but right now, still ahead, the big question. After Donald Trump's projected win, what is his margin of victory going to be over Nikki Haley? We're standing by for more votes to come in from South Carolina, and we're waiting to hear from Nikki Haley about her home state defeat. Back in a moment. And we're bringing you a key race alert right now in the South Carolina Republican primary, which we have already called for Donald Trump. Let's take a look at the vote board here. 10% of the estimated vote is in, and Donald Trump is up with 57.6% of the vote. He has 50,794 votes. He is almost 14,000 votes ahead of Nikki Haley, who has 41.9% of the vote. She has 36,987 votes. There are 50 delegates at stake, and this is just 10% of the vote. We're expecting many more votes coming in throughout the night. Let's go now to Kylie Atwood, who is at Nikki Haley campaign headquarters in Charleston, South Carolina. We do expect Governor Haley to speak at any moment. Kylie, any indication of what the Governor Haley might say? It is a surprisingly festive event that you're at. I have to say, I would think that perhaps it would be a little bit more funereal given the unfortunate news for her, but tell us what you were expecting tonight.
Well, Jake, it was actually a bit of a muted response here in the room when CNN projected that Trump was going to win here in South Carolina, Nikki Haley's home state. And that is until there was one man with a South Carolina Loves Nikki Haley sign who started dancing in front of the projection behind us, playing CNN, playing our projection that Trump is going to win. And that was when Trump was speaking that he started doing that. Then chants broke out in the room for Nikki Haley, and over the course of the last half hour, so the room has really filled up. I will say, I went out and spoke to some of her supporters. There was not one person who believed that Nikki Haley losing South Carolina means the beginning of the end to her campaign. They were very defiant. They believe she's going on. I spoke with one supporter who is headed to North Carolina, which of course is a Super Tuesday state, to try and get voters there to head out to the polls for Nikki Haley. And she told me, quote, "I don't think this is over." I spoke with another person in the room who said, "We're all for anyone who isn't Donald Trump." So there's quite a bit of energy in this room for Nikki Haley, even though they recognize that she is likely to lose here in her home state. I do want to point out one thing. Her campaign put so much time and resources into this state. They had more than 30 campaign events here over the last month. They really tried to do everything they can to compete here, to get supporters to vote for Nikki Haley. But I also spoke with campaign aides today who recognized that there were frustrations along the way just because of the stronghold that Trump has here on the Republican Party in South Carolina and just on voters generally. For example, Clemson University, which is Nikki Haley's alma mater, the Republican Party of that college actually endorsed Donald Trump. That was a frustrating thing for the campaign. Of course, Nikki Haley did do an event there. It was a pretty large event, but there have been frustrations along the way for watching to see when she comes out here. Of course, after the New Hampshire projection was made for Donald Trump, she came out pretty quickly. Tonight, Donald Trump beat her to the stand, but we'll see when her campaigns decide it's a good moment for her to talk to her supporters here in the room. Jake?
All right, Kylie Atwood at Haley headquarters in Charleston, South Carolina. So I guess one of the things that's interesting as we look at the exit polls, David Chalian, is Kylie said something interesting. They're frustrated with the stronghold, the lock that Donald Trump has on the Republican Party in South Carolina and everywhere else, everywhere. And let's talk about the voters that Donald Trump won today to look at the degree of that stronghold.
Exactly, Jake. I mean, we're digging into these numbers to see what powered this big victory tonight. I guess right now he's about 15 points ahead, 15 percentage points ahead of Nikki Haley in the vote count. But look at his huge swaths of the party that he just dominates with. So among those who say they consider themselves part of the MAGA movement, which is 44% of the electorate, nearly half the electorate, Donald Trump, obviously, he's the leader of that movement, gets 89% of them. Haley, only 11%. Among those who say they are very conservative. Now, this is 43% of the overall electorate. Trump wins 86% of them. And just what a difference 8 years makes. 8 years ago in this primary, which he won, he did not win the very conservative voters. Ted Cruz won the very conservative voters, even though Trump won the primary. But again, 86%, Trump's party. Take a look among white evangelicals, similar story. So 61% of the electorate is white evangelical Christian today. Trump wins 3/4 of them. 8 years ago, he won 1/3 of them. He bested Cruz with these voters, but he was only at 1/3. He now has 3/4 of them inside this Republican primary today. And then on the issue of immigration, 68% of voters in the primary today say their preference is for favoring deporting most undocumented immigrants here. 68% say that's the preferred immigration policy, deport the undocumented. Trump wins them 79% to 21% for Haley. And we saw that immigration was indeed the very top issue, most important issue for voters in this primary.
Fascinating stuff. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're expecting former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley to speak at any moment. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Hey, we got another key race alert for you in South Carolina, the Republican primary, with 20% of the estimated vote in. Donald Trump is still in the lead. He has 58.8% of the vote. That's 97,933 votes, roughly 30,000 votes ahead of Nikki Haley, who has 40.7% of the vote. She has 67,798 votes. That's 20% of the vote in. He still has a rather commanding lead. Let's go to John King at the Magic Wall here to see where exactly these votes have come in. 40% is not a victory, but it's still better than she's done in any primary, but it's still her home state, and she probably should be doing better.
If you want delegates, number one, winning would give you an actual victory.
Always good.
If you look at the map over your shoulder, you can look at it that way. Donald Trump has won the first 4 contests now, and he is up to 92 delegates.
Never been done.
Never been done. There's an asterisk there, if you will, that it's never been done in a contested primary, and he's sort of the Republican incumbent. But she asked for a one-on-one contest. She got it in New Hampshire. She asked for a one-on-one contest. She got it in South Carolina. He's a long way from the 1,215 you need to win mathematically. But as we all know, a lot of nominating contests are settled early on by a winning streak, and he has an amazing winning streak. The question now is, as we wait, we're at about 22% of the vote. Can she stay above 40%? And more importantly, as she says she's staying on through Super Tuesday, you at least want to be able to say you're amassing some delegates. He's going to get the most. He's going to get the overwhelming majority. He's at 92 to her 17.
He's already got 29 out of South Carolina.
He's already got 29 tonight. He could get all 50. If he doesn't get all 50, there's 1 or 2 congressional districts where she would get 3. 7 districts, 3 delegates for each district. We have to wait to see that come in. But let's just look at the places right now. Let's just start with Haley. Because of the 46 counties in South Carolina, she's right now leading in 3. But again, 14 votes to 12 votes. This is a pretty Republican area, so I wouldn't go to Vegas.
That's not decisive.
Yeah, I would not go to Vegas on that one. This is a county that if Haley is running strong, Marco Rubio won this county in 2016, for example, against Donald Trump. So if she's running strong, this is a place where she could win. And it's a big piece of a congressional district, but it's not the entire congressional district. The congressional district, Columbia is kind of split. The county is split, not Columbia. The county is split in 2 districts. But in Richland County, she's winning 64% of the vote at the moment. But again, only a quarter of the vote in. So it's way too early to make any assumption based on that. And then this should be her strongest area of the state. This is Charleston County. Call it the Low Country. Congressional district, the former governor Mark Sanford represented it, came to Congress, was governor, then left the governorship. She was the governor who succeeded him. He won the seat again, then lost it because he criticized Donald Trump. He had a Trump primary there. But she's got 64% of the vote there. We're up to 33%. So conceivable, still a ways to go in the count. Conceivable she wins this county, but again, the congressional district that this county is involved in stretches up here as well. So there's math we have to do on that. So at the moment, though, in the state she won election twice as governor, she is leading in 3 of 46 counties. She's getting thumped at home.
So, and just for those trying to keep track of the delegate math, 50 delegates from South Carolina. The winner gets 29 of them automatically. Trump has already been assigned those in our delegate count. So then there are 7 congressional districts, and whoever wins the congressional district gets 3 delegates for each congressional district. Right now, and it's so early, but right now it's possible Nikki Haley could win maybe 2 congressional districts based on what we're seeing in these very, very early numbers, but we don't know. But it does appear that is at least right now, with all we know, which is very limited, right now she might get 6 delegates.
That would be if that happened, it would be 44 for him and 6 for her.
Right.
Delegates of the 50.
Theoretically, that is what we think, based on our limited knowledge and information right now, the best that she could do.
And just sorry to disappoint you at home. We may not know the answer to that tonight.
Right.
Because, again, there's a congressional district that splits this county. There's a congressional district that includes this county, but it stretches up into here. And so these votes have to be counted by the state. They have to make sure that some of the precincts, make sure this precinct's in the district, this precinct's over the line. So getting the votes by district, by county, they come in pretty quickly. By congressional district, sometimes that math takes a little longer.
But what's interesting about it for people at home is some people might think, well, there are 50 congressional districts. Why wouldn't they just divide them up? If this ends up being the margin of victory, why wouldn't they just have Nikki Haley get 40% of them and Donald Trump get 60% of them? Why wouldn't they just do that? And it's because that's not how South Carolina Republicans decided they want to do it.
Different states have different rules. Pretty soon we'll move into a lot of winner-take-all primaries. The way South Carolina does it is there are actually 26 winner-take-all delegates. Then there are 3 Republican National Committee delegates that are allocated to the statewide winner. So there's 29 essentially. Whoever wins the state gets the first 29. And the other 21, 3 for each of the 7 districts.
But it is, if you look at why they do it that way, they are trying to stop competition. They are trying to have the winner, if the winner has some sort of momentum going on, do better and like move people out who might be challenging that front runner. I mean, that's my interpretation of why they would have rules like that. Not that they set them up for Donald Trump, but maybe he was on their mind to begin with.
The party has a rule that you cannot have a winner take all. Winner takes everything.
Right.
Congressional districts don't matter. They can't have that until next month. But that rule comes up pretty soon.
Very interesting. Dana Bash?
Okay, thank you so much. I think, look, one of the headlines from that discussion is that Donald Trump is going to get almost all, if not all, of the delegates in South Carolina tonight. And yet, we saw, Abby, earlier, Kylie was at Haley headquarters. We haven't heard from her yet. We certainly expect to hear from her this evening. And there was a party going on. Yeah, square that circle, Abby.
Yeah, look, there's an open bar.
I've covered, right, there's that, and I covered Bernie Sanders in 2016 when he kept his campaign going for a little while, and his supporters were enthusiastic. It's a good sign for the strength of the support for Nikki Haley in this state right now, but that room is a small room when it's compared to the rest of the Republican Party. And these zombie candidacies, which Nikki Haley's candidacy might very well become very soon, they can have an impact. This is maybe bringing in the delegate conversation they were just having. Sometimes acquiring delegates going into a convention can give you leverage over what happens in that convention, over what the eventual nominee does. Sometimes it keeps the conversation going about alternatives. Sometimes, I shouldn't say sometimes, this is the one time when we could be facing a scenario, some people in the Republican Party believe, in which the Republican nominee might in some way disqualify himself before we get to November. And then what? And the answer could be whoever is still technically a candidate, it could be a Nikki Haley.
Which is, that last point is one of the key reasons you hear Nikki Haley and her campaign aides and the people around her arguing that Republican voters still need choices.
And look, I mean, there are rich people in the Republican Party who don't want Donald Trump to be president, don't want him to win.
Rich people not in the Republican Party.
And they're donating, a lot of them are donating to Nikki Haley.
Yeah,
exactly. And the question, will they continue to do that just to make Donald Trump's life a little more difficult? The question is, they have said that they're going to continue on to Super Tuesday states. We heard the campaign manager telling Kylie Atwood that they would have a 7-figure ad buy in these Super Tuesday states. That is actually not a lot of money, given some of these very expensive media markets in so many of these states. So do they significantly try to amp up the money that could make, not Donald Trump's life more difficult, but at least keep her in the race? What is the message she's going to tell voters when she speaks here in a matter of minutes? And how does she try to, does she do what she did in the last 2 states? I did better than expected. Or does she instead say, something else, say that maybe perhaps that reason, the voters still need a choice, so I'm going to stay in this race?
Yeah, and I want to keep going because I am the only alternative to Donald Trump right now. And that's an important thing to have in the Republican electorate and in the Republican system right now.
Yeah, I mean, as long as she has the money to keep the lights on, put aside even the money to put ads up, just the money to keep the lights on, to pay her staff, she can stay in this thing and she can make a case of why not. And her voters, especially given the ones Kylie spoke to, they seem very receptive to that. There is a 30% of the Republican Party, maybe a little less, that wants someone else. It's not enough to win the nomination, but they're there.
Okay, Anderson, over to you.
Thanks very much. We are awaiting Nikki Haley's speech still. We have a key race alert. Let's take a look at the latest numbers here. Donald Trump, 57.6% of the vote. Nikki Haley with 41.9%. That's with just 25%, though, of precincts reporting. So more numbers still to come in. It is 8 p.m. Eastern here on the East Coast. Donald Trump is the projected winner of the Republican presidential primary in South Carolina. Delivering a huge blow to the state's former governor, Nikki Haley, in her own backyard, even bringing him closer to clinching the GOP nomination. We are, as I said, standing by to hear from Nikki Haley any moment. We'll obviously bring you her remarks live. That is the crowd that has been waiting. Let's check in with our Kristen Holmes. Kristen?
Yeah, Anderson, I'm talking to a lot of sources here who are close to Donald Trump saying that now is the time to pivot to the general election. They believe that these 4 definitive wins in a row make Donald Trump the presumptive nominee, even though the delegate math is not there, even though Nikki Haley has not dropped out of the race. Now, to be clear, he is not the presumptive nominee at this time, but this is 4 significant wins for the former president. And you kind of heard that in his speech tonight. He didn't mention Nikki Haley once. Now, that wasn't just because of this pivot to the general election. This is because it was the same speech he was supposed to give in New Hampshire when he won, but did not. As we remember, in New Hampshire, Nikki Haley took the stage first, giving a very enthusiastic speech despite the fact that she lost. And Donald Trump, instead of celebrating his win in the state, launched into a series of attacks for quite some time against Nikki Haley. His team, not happy with that. He completely changed the narrative away from his win. Tonight, a different person. He was celebrating his win. He was not mentioning Nikki Haley and turning his attention to Joe Biden. Now, the big question is when we start to see Donald Trump's campaign actually move to a general. And I mean, not in terms of messaging, but in terms of money. And Donald Trump did just get a big, significant win in terms of funds. A new super PAC has been established by a long-term friend and donor, Ike Perlmutter. He used to be the executive of Marvel. It was going to be run by a family friend, Sergio Gore, and they say they've already got donors from across the country. Now, this, of course, is coming at a time where Donald Trump not only needs money for a campaign, but also needs a significant number of funds for all those legal fees that he is facing. Now, that's not where super PAC money is going to go, but it is another avenue for Donald Trump to raise cash as he looks again towards a general election.
Kristen Holmes, thanks for checking in with you shortly. I want to go to David Chalian with more exit poll information.
Anderson, the other thing that Donald Trump needs in a general election is a fully unified Republican Party. And we see his dominance here, but I'm going to take you inside these exit poll results among Haley voters. Obviously, the smaller share of voters tonight since we projected this race, but I do think it is telling for the work Donald Trump and his team will have to do to bring the party totally unified heading into a general. So among Haley voters in the South Carolina primary tonight, what are your feelings if Trump wins the nomination? 78% of them will be dissatisfied if Trump is the nominee. Among Haley voters, we asked, is Trump fit for the presidency if he is convicted of a crime? 82% of Haley voters in this Republican primary say no, he's unfit for the presidency if he's convicted of a crime. Who is physically, mentally fit to serve as president? Again, these are Haley voters we're looking at tonight. 74% of them, not surprisingly, say Haley is fit, both physically and mentally, to serve effectively. Only 4% of her voters think Trump fits that bill, that he is physically and mentally fit. 18% say both of them are. And here's one that's really interesting. Haley voters actually think Donald Trump can beat Joe Biden, despite the fact that Nikki Haley every day says Donald Trump cannot beat Joe Biden. That's one of her main arguments day in and day out why she's still in the race. 56% of her voters actually say that it's very or somewhat likely that Trump would indeed defeat Biden, Anderson.
David, at this point, is it clear, how many of those people polled may be Democrats?
Well, we do have a breakdown of party ID, but it's not a whole swath of them. I don't have it in front of me. But it is, we saw it was like 20% of the electorate was independent. Far less than that were Democrats in this electorate tonight. The vast majority of people voting in this primary are actually self-identified Republicans.
All right, David Chalian, thanks so much. Back with the panel in New York. I mean, we did hear from somebody who decided not to vote in the Democratic primary and decided to vote for Nikki Haley for this very reason.
But I mean, we're looking at the votes come in, and one of the things that is kind of fascinating to watch is that this isn't a 65-35 race. Nikki is performing at over 40%. Those are blinking lights for Donald Trump. I mean, that's 40% of a conservative military electorate that is rejecting you. Not only that, but per Jake and others, that she's competitive in 2 congressional districts right now. Not only District 1, which is Charleston in the Low Country, but also Jim Clyburn's district, which is District 6. And so when you think about these things, I mean, this is more competitive than people thought. Now, she's still getting beat by 17 points in her home state, but she's performing at over 40%. And I think that is something that, I mean, Nikki can't celebrate that per se, but the Republican Party has to be keeping their eye on that because 41% of the electorate in South Carolina is rejecting Donald Trump.
By the way, I'm told about 4% of those in the exit polls were Democrats.
Which is negligible. I mean, this isn't, this isn't New Hampshire. Republicans can't say, oh my God, Republicans flipped it. It's anti-freedom.
I believe in closed primaries. People ought to choose.
It's called freedom. Smell it. Smell it.
We're going to be smelling it in November. I
I think that last slide by Chalian was the most interesting, was even among Nikki Haley voters, they're convinced that Trump could beat Joe Biden.
Yes.
There was a time in this race, probably about 6+ months ago, when Trump was lagging Joe Biden. And there was a window that another Republican could have emerged. But after the indictments came down and folks kind of coalesced around Trump, and Trump started performing better head-to-head against Joe Biden, the race dynamics fundamentally changed. Never mind the fact that Nikki Haley performs far better head-to-head against Joe Biden. So long as enough Republicans are convinced that Trump can beat him and Biden's weak, so many of them are going to come.
This was, in fact, this was the principal message that she was delivering. If you go back to the first debate, that Trump can't win. And she continues to say, we've lost with Trump. But that is not a winning argument with Republican voters, right?
Yeah, but it's important to point out, the reason you talk about electability is to win voters you don't already have, right? Because you can't attack Trump personally. Right. It pisses them off.
Right.
It does not shock me in the slightest that half of Nikki Haley's voters think Trump can win. That's why they're voting for Nikki Haley. Right. Because they want to stop Trump from being president, not stop Trump from being the nominee of their party. That's a real thing. And that's why Nikki Haley's raising money from a lot of Republicans and conservatives because they don't want Trump to be president, not because they don't want him to be the nominee.
I think the other problem, though, is, Politico was looking at her donors, and more than 5,000 of her donors were people who had donated to Joe Biden in 2020. So we talk about the jet fuel being the thing to kind of keep you going when you're losing. She is being buoyed by a mix of constituencies that at the end of the day still don't reflect the party itself. That's always going to be a problem.
Yeah, someone sent me a note tonight that basically said the resistance retweets are not helping Nikki Haley, and that, of course, is.
I mean, the problem is she's an avatar for that crowd now. I mean, it's a mixture of a handful of Republicans who have never liked Trump, a lot of the never Trump people who've gravitated out of the party, a lot of Democrats who, of course, haven't blinked since 2016. She's an avatar for all of them. I mean, she represents all of them.
But I don't want to quote, please, God forgive me for quoting Gavin Newsom up here. I don't really want to quote Gavin Newsom. But he did make a good point about Nikki Haley. She's one of the best surrogates that the Democratic Party has right now. I mean, she literally is the one who is utilizing.
The Biden campaign is blasting out things that she's saying on
because they're true about
Donald Trump. She makes coherent points, unlike the person that they're actually working for. So they have to put out some kind of content.
The problem is that her appeal is what makes her a good general election candidate and what makes her a bad primary candidate. I mean, I said to you, Andrews, I remember sitting here and saying to you that that Trump has great strength with one particular cohort that's important in a Republican primary, which is Republicans. She doesn't have that. But she would be a stronger general election candidate because she does have appeals to independents, to some Democratic voters. But I think the problem with let me just finish this one point. The problem with the Republican Party, and it isn't just in the presidential races, the thing that it takes to win primaries makes you more vulnerable in a general election.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the character that she's showing is impressive, though. And, she's going to come out here, she's going to say whatever she says, we're going to move on. But the easy thing to do right now, to your point earlier, is just to quit. I mean, look, she's made her point. She's a household name. Everybody knows where she stands. Quit. She's not quitting. The lady's not for quitting. She's for staying. She's for sticking. She's for fighting. And I think that there's something that's good about that. And sometimes people actually believe stuff. I wouldn't have put Nikki Haley in that camp. I thought she was much more transactional, kind of a plastic politician. But there's something's happening here now that I think is admirable. Do you see it differently?
Can I ask you about that? And
Sure.
Bakari, I'm interested to know, since you know the state so well too, one of the biggest critiques about Haley all the way through her career is that it has been hard to tell which version of herself she actually is. She has been this transactional. I mean, I covered her very first race for governor in South Carolina. I was down there as that happened. You could see some of the things in that you're seeing now, her grit, her political skills, her kind of willingness. I mean, she, calls Sarah Palin, gets that endorsement. She was a fighter then, but she was a very different candidate ideologically, right? She was a Tea Party candidate. She was, if anything, modeling what became the Trump movement at that time. Then she goes and she works for Trump. She repudiates him after January 6th. It's a little confusing where she stands. Is this actually the real Nikki Haley that we're seeing now?
Yes and no. The answer to the question is she was a Tea Party candidate when Tea Party was necessary to be governor of South Carolina, when Sarah Palin came in and endorsed her. The thing that we're seeing about Nikki Haley is something that's always been true. She's extremely transactional. She's adiaphorous. She's a fence sitter when it comes to different issues. That's how she gets herself in trouble. But what we're seeing is that she's a fighter. Yeah. She always has been a fighter. I mean, she's been a fighter for a very long period of time. In 2010, when she ran for governor of South Carolina, Gresham Barrett was supposed to win that race. She ran against Gresham Barrett, who was a sitting United States congressman. I mean, she ran against Henry McMaster. She ran against Andre Bauer, all of these names who were bigger than the lowly state representative from Lexington County. When she got elected to the State House, she beat the oldest member of the General Assembly the election before I beat the oldest member of the General Assembly. And so she literally has been a fighter. This grit that you're seeing, the character that you're talking about, that is Nikki Haley. The problem is that the grit does not meet the consistency in political views. That's what
Listen, and we know we're in a primary season right now, and it is incredibly hard to see how there's any kind of a path for Nikki Haley. But the million-dollar question remains, where do her voters go? Because if she once again holds on to about a third of voters in a general election, is she keeping those from Donald Trump? Do they go to Joe Biden? Do they look for a third-party candidate? That's what we need to be walking on. Because if I'm a Republican advising Donald Trump, a third of the state being with her, that is a glaring alarm bell in a general election.
Just quickly, we'll come back. I just want to go to Kylie Atwood at Nikki Haley headquarters. She's got some new information about why we haven't heard yet from the former governor. Kylie, what are you learning?
Well, listen, what I'm told is that Nikki Haley is huddled in the same building that we're in right now where this party is happening. She's with her closest aides. She's in a war room. What they're doing is they're tracking the votes that are coming in. I'm told by one source that she's in a very serious mood. Of course, that's no surprise given how high the stakes are for her. But one of the reasons that she hasn't spoke yet is because they want a larger percentage of the votes to actually be in. They're looking at certain areas in the state where they are highly populated. They're not seeing all of the vote tallies in from those areas, so they're watching for those. I'm also told that it doesn't look like she's planning a dropout speech in any way right now. She just wants to see what the margins are looking like before she comes out here and speaks with her supporters in this room. And I do want to say that this room is incredibly lively, Anderson. They have been breaking out into cheers over the last, hour or so, particularly because CNN is on in the room, and every time that someone says something that would be a benefit to Nikki Haley, they break into cheers, just like I'm talking right now. I can hear them speaking behind me. So we'll watch to see when they decide it's a good time for her to come out. But Nikki Haley and her team closely monitoring everything that they're seeing across the state.
All right, Kylie Atwood, with 30% of the vote in right now, we'll come back to you.
Can I ask you a question, Van? You raised an issue about, you described Haley as having character and staying in this race, and that shows it's about character. Do you think the converse is true about the Democratic Party? Why wasn't there someone who exhibited the same kind of determined character to stay in the race against Joe Biden? I mean, a lot of people in the Democratic Party have the same questions about Biden's fitness that people have in the Republican Party about Trump. Why don't you think someone took up that slot in the Democratic Party?
Well, because we did so well in the midterms that I think a lot of people looked at Joe Biden's cards and they said, hold on a second, this dude is always underestimated. People said there's no way Joe Biden's going to be able to get the nomination, and he got it. He's going up against Trump. He beat him, and he was supposed to, it's going to be a red wave. It looked like a red trickle. And people said, hey, maybe there's something we don't understand about the Democratic Party under Joe Biden. And in that moment, I mean, if we had gotten crushed, destroyed in the midterms, I think a lot of people would have jumped in. But at that moment, it didn't look smart, and now things, I think, looks different. That's how I see it.
Also, Biden
You see it
hasn't
differently?
been indicted 4 times, and he didn't try to, overthrow an election. There's that,
But
too.
the numbers are bad, though.
But 86% of the country tells
I get it.
pollsters he can't serve another term. And so you're saying Haley is showing character by pointing out the obvious flaws in Trump's candidacy, which I grant you. But no Democrat with, I guess, the same character.
So I have a different theory about this. All right, so I have a different theory about this. I think if Gavin Newsom thought he could become the nominee for 2024, he would trample small children to do it. What he won't do is risk being the candidate who got Donald Trump reelected.
Yes, that's right.
Fear of helping Trump is the great discipliner of the Democratic
And contrary,
Party.
and what Nikki Haley's learning is the same lesson that any other Democrat would have learned running against Joe Biden, which is that there was no path to beat Joe Biden. I mean, anybody smart watching this, you're not going to beat Joe. You might beat him in Iowa. You may beat him in New Hampshire. You're not beating him in Nevada. You're not beating him in South Carolina, and you're not beating him at Super Tuesday. I mean, look, we know that he's a consequential grandfather. We know that, right? And the Democratic Party has embraced that. That is our candidate. But nobody was going to beat him in a primary, and that's not a character question.
I just want to say something I do want to hear from you, David. But first of all, I love Gavin Newsom. I just want to say, you said you didn't want to quote him. I just want to say, I'll quote him. I'll quote him all day. I've known the guy for.
We can have this debate in 2028.
Exactly. I want somebody to say something. He's one of the most popular Democrats in the country we got on this panel. I love Gavin Newsom. But there is, I think, a history here that disciplined our folks. When you look at the times the Democrats have challenged our sitting presidents, you have 68. Johnson got challenged. Nixon won. Then you had 76. Carter got challenged, and then Reagan won. So there is a real fear in our party. You challenge one of our sitting presidents, and the other side.
David, and then we got to go break.
Yeah, no, look, I agree with what Jonas said. There was no desire, once it was clear that Biden was going to run, no desire to weaken him for the fight against Trump. But, Scott, it's also true that there is affection and respect for Joe Biden in the Democratic Party that is very broad. They don't have concerns about his character that a lot of Republicans have about Donald Trump.
Just a quick note, some reporting that I just got from a source. I think the thing, number we want to watch in terms of what Haley's going to do here is 40%. They're waiting to see if they can get that number. If it stays above 40%, I get the sense that they may be making a decision. She's got to decide if she's going to stay in this race, how she's going to present. If they come in over 40%, I think we may see a very different Nikki Haley tonight than we might have otherwise.
All right, coming up, we're going to take Nikki Haley's remarks to supporters in the nation when it happens. We're breaking down the scope of Trump's South Carolina win as votes keep coming in. We'll be right back.
And I have a key race alert for you right now with 36% of the vote in. Donald Trump is still far ahead with 59.3% of the vote. He has 182,783 votes. That's more than 59,000 ahead of Nikki Haley, who has 40.1% of the vote, 123,442 votes. That's with 36% of the estimated vote in. We have already projected that Donald Trump will win the South Carolina Republican primary. Let's get an update now on where the fight for delegates stands with Donald Trump's South Carolina win. David Chalian is crunching the numbers for us. David?
Yeah, Jake, so as you know, 50 delegates at stake tonight. We've already been able to allocate 38 of them all to Donald Trump. There are 12 delegates not yet allocated. We were looking congressional district by congressional district as the vote comes in. Donald Trump won the statewide delegates, and now he's won some of the congressional district delegates that we've been able to allocate. 38 tonight so far, 12 unallocated. But take a look at where we are in terms of the delegates to date in this race. Donald Trump has now crossed the 100 mark. He's at 101 delegates thus far. Up there in the right-hand corner, you need 1,215 delegates to win the Republican Party nomination. Nobody's made a ton of progress yet. We haven't had that many contests. But Donald Trump is far ahead. 101, Nikki Haley with 17 so far, Ron DeSantis with 9, Vivek Ramaswamy with 3. And like I said, there are still 12 not yet allocated from tonight's contest in South Carolina.
All right, but most of them have been allocated already. Let's talk about this while we wait for Nikki Haley to come out. Obviously, with 40.1% of the vote, that's a roughly 19% loss in terms of percentage points. Haley is getting a shellacking, but it is not quite the shellacking that Donald Trump predicted. He said he would beat her by 25 to 30 points. We still don't know what it's going to be at the end of the day, but it does look like she's going to do a little bit, I wouldn't say better, but not as horribly as that. You buy that spin?
I don't think it matters. I honestly do not think it matters what the margin is at the end of the day tonight for the purposes of determining what Nikki Haley's future is. The question is, can Nikki Haley win a primary in this contest? That's not a question her campaign has been willing to answer to date. They say they're going to compete in Super Tuesday states. They have not said where they think they can actually win. Whether the number is 40% or 35% or 42%, this is a significant victory for Donald Trump that basically blows out of the water any real possibility, barring something catastrophic, that someone else will come in and take his place. And spin is what it is, but I don't see how 40% changes anything for Nikki Haley today compared to what it was like yesterday.
And yet, Dana, I mean, Bakari Sellers, former South Carolina representative, made the argument, bad night for Haley, but also that's 40% of the South Carolina electorate not voting for Donald Trump.
And that is part of what I'm getting on my phone, and maybe we all are, from people in and around the Haley campaign. That's the argument that they're making around that 40% issue. And it's not just that Donald Trump, perhaps, and we don't know because we don't have all the votes in it. The gulf could be wider by the time we get to the end of the night, but it's about expectations and Donald Trump setting expectations. Of course, part of this, maybe more than part of it, is spin, but it does beg the question, and we got some of the answers in the exit polls that we saw from David Chalian about what happens in a general election with those Haley voters and how excited they will be to vote for Donald Trump in the general election.
Can I just add real quick?
Yeah.
Exit polls, okay? Feelings if Donald Trump wins the nomination. 72% of the people who voted today said they would be satisfied.
Yeah, but
that's a sizable amount.
But I do think that there are warning signs for Trump, not just for the 40% or so of Haley supporters. When you break down about those Haley supporters, 78% say they would be dissatisfied of Haley supporters if Trump were the nominee, and then if convicted of a crime, 82% say no, he is not fit for president. That is actually consistent with what we've seen in the other primary states, and could give the Biden people some hope in some of those swing states at picking off those Haley supporters, people, those right of center, moderate leaning voters who clearly are not there. We know from tonight and other nights, Trump is dominating with conservative and very conservative voters. There's one big reason why he's winning in this very conservative state. But when we get into the general election electorate, these are warning signs that they had to take seriously.
And I just want to interrupt for 1 second, just because, Dana, at the moment you were saying it a second ago about we don't know the final vote.
Yeah.
If we could put the votes up right now, Nikki Haley dropped below 40% on the vote board. She's now at 39.6%. Donald Trump at 59.8%. That's with 39% of the vote in. So we still have more than half the vote to come in. And we should also note that in New Hampshire, she got 43% of the vote. So she has constantly been saying she just wants to do better in the next race than she did in the last one. And she certainly did better in New Hampshire than she did in Iowa. If you take out the Nevada caucus for a second, the argument that she needs to do better in South Carolina than she did in New Hampshire, as of right now, she is not.
And this is her home state. This is where she should be doing.
Where she won 2 statewide elections before.
Yeah, and the other thing I think we should point out is we are analyzing this electorate because this is what we have. These are the freshest numbers to kind of get a sense of where Republicans are. That's in no way suggesting that if there is dissatisfaction, even if it is close to 40%, with Donald Trump in South Carolina, the Democrat is going to win South Carolina. I mean, that is not even close to the case. The question is going to be in going forward in some of the swing states and the states that are going to determine the general election in November, and whether or not there are going to be people who are, maybe it's not Nikki Haley or just any other Republican other than Donald Trump, if they're upset. I think at this point, we've pretty much established that by and large, Donald Trump dominates.
Yeah. It's also interesting, too. Haley has been making the argument that Donald Trump is not electable. She's been saying that over and over again, or this could be a very close election, and she would win much more handedly based on national polls that do show her having a more sizable lead over Joe Biden. That didn't really convince voters, her own supporters. A majority of her own supporters, according to these exit polls, believe that Donald Trump could win, could beat Joe Biden. So that has been a real challenge for her, making that electability argument in large part because of Biden's weakness gives Trump a bit of a boost among voters who may not think initially thought he was could win this race.
It's interesting because it was 4 years ago in South Carolina where Joe Biden's electability argument prevailed. Remember, he had gotten clobbered in Iowa, he'd gotten clobbered in New Hampshire, and then he came forward with the argument, I'm the only one that can unite all the different factions of the Democratic Party, and with no small help from Congressman Jim Clyburn, the dean of the congressional delegation there, he was able to make that argument to the point that South Carolina pretty much ended the contest. Bernie Sanders stuck around for a while, but generally speaking, South Carolina bought the electability argument. It was just that it was Democrats. A lot of these Republicans, by the way, think Donald Trump will win. It's not just, they don't buy her electability argument, but they also just don't think that she's, it's not that they reject the electability argument. They just don't believe it about Donald Trump. They think Donald Trump can win.
Yeah, I think that they are pretty comfortable with. Look, Republican voters are comfortable with, and I see Nikki Haley coming out to the stage.
He's coming out.
They're comfortable with Donald Trump as their nominee by and large.
Yeah.
And look, I also think that what you said about South Carolina for Democrats could play a very similar role for Republicans in this cycle.
Yeah, let's listen in.
But I love that about you. Thank you. You know, I want to start off obviously thanking my family. I am so incredibly blessed. I was able to speak with Michael this morning. His support has been amazing. The kids have really stepped up, sometimes too much, but they have stepped up in a way that has made me so, so proud. I am blessed because I had the ability to actually go vote today with my mom. You know, and there's something very special with the fact that she was a lawyer in India, and she was named one of the first female judges. And because of the times, she was never able to sit on the bench. But the fact that she could go with me and cast her ballot for her daughter as President of the United States was an amazing. I want to thank my parents who taught me strength and grace. I want to thank Michael's parents who have been unbelievably supportive through all of this. And I want to thank my brothers and my sister and their families for always supporting us every step of the way. Thank you. I feel blessed tonight. I've felt blessed through this entire journey. Even when it's been tough, I haven't lost sight of that. I've felt God's strength and grace every step of the way. I'm blessed to have served the state that raised me. And I look forward to continuing to be blessed to serve the state that raised me, whether it's going and voting with my mom or whether it is being with our family. We're very grateful for the good people of South Carolina. Thank you. And it's a blessing to know that across our sweet state, everyone wants to bring back the America we know and love. That's the underlying message of what happened today. I want to congratulate Donald Trump on his victory. And I want to thank the people of South Carolina for using the power of your voice. No matter the results, I love the people of our state. I love what we accomplished together, and I love how we united during our worst challenges and tragedies. I've always seen our state as a family. Families are honest with each other. They say the hard truths. That's what I've done this entire campaign. And that's what I'll do now. What I saw today was South Carolina's frustration with our country's direction. I've seen that same frustration nationwide. I share it. I feel it to my core. I couldn't be more worried about America. It seems like our country is falling apart. But here's the thing. America will come apart if we make the wrong choices. This has never been about me or my political future. We need to beat Joe Biden in November. I don't believe Donald Trump can beat Joe Biden. Nearly every day, Trump drives people away, including with his comments just yesterday. Today in South Carolina, we're getting around 40% of the vote. That's about what we got in New Hampshire, too. I'm going to count it. I know 40% is not 50%. But I also know 40% is not some tiny group. There are huge numbers of voters in our Republican primaries who are saying they want an alternative. I said earlier this week that no matter what happens in South Carolina, I would continue to run for president. I'm a woman of my word. I'm not giving up this fight when a majority of Americans disapprove of both Donald Trump and Joe Biden. South Carolina has spoken. We're the fourth state to do so. In the next 10 days, another 21 states and territories will speak. They have the right to a real choice. Not a Soviet-style election with only one candidate. And I have a duty to give them that choice. We can't afford 4 more years of Biden's failures or Trump's lack of focus. We're at 30 34 trillion in debt and counting. Not even a third of our 8th graders are proficient in reading. Families can't afford groceries. 9 million illegals have come to our border with enough fentanyl to kill every single American. And beyond our borders, the world is on fire. War is spreading further every day. If we aren't strong, those wars will draw America further in. And it's not just about policies. We won't get out of our downward spiral if we keep obsessing over the past. Does anyone seriously think Joe Biden or Donald Trump will unite our country to solve our problems? One of them calls his fellow Americans fascists. The other calls his fellow Americans vermin. They aren't fighting for our country's future. They're demanding we fight each other. The younger generation, my children's generation, knows it better than anyone. They deserve better. They deserve leadership. And so I will keep fighting for them and for you and for all of America. From the start of this campaign, I have made clear that I'm running for president to save America. I'm running to remind us what it means to be an American. In the America I know and love, we believe in each other. And we believe in America's inherent goodness. Now is the time to renew that belief. Now is the time to remember who we are. We're citizens of the greatest country in human history. And we must lead now more than ever before. I'm grateful to South Carolina. I always have been and I always will be. And I'm grateful that today is not the end of our story. We're headed to Michigan tomorrow. And we're headed to the Super Tuesday states throughout all of next week. We'll keep fighting for America, and we won't rest until America wins. I want to give a few thank yous because we have had some people who've really, there have been too many to thank, but I really have to single out Congressman Ralph Norman. Ralph has had pressure on him from every side that he needed to not support me and that he needed to step away from me. And he always said, there's no way in hell.
He couldn't be here
I want to
tonight.
thank Senator Tom Davis,
And that is
Representative
Nikki
Nathan
Haley.
Valentine,
Speaking tonight, she said that in the next 10 days, 21 states and territories have the right to a choice and that she is moving forward to at least through Super Tuesday, which is obviously on March 5th. What do you think of her remarks?
Well, listen, her team's saying she's going to be in 7 different states over the next 10 days. She's powering through. She said what she had to say last night. There's not really any better spin to put on it than to say, you know, somebody who's running is virtually an incumbent, Donald Trump getting 60% and 40% being against him. That's not a mandate, especially with the entire Republican Party apparatus behind him, with most elected Republicans behind him. Now, it's unclear what a path could look like for Nikki Haley. I think we're all very open-eyed about that. But she is underscoring the fundamental weakness of Donald Trump, and it should be a 5-alarm fire for the party. But for some reason, it is not.
When she says 40% is not some tiny group, I thought that was really well put, because basically it looks like a landslide. I mean, ordinarily American politics, but it's not a tiny group. There are a large number of people within the Republican Party who have a sense of disquiet and concern, and they are speaking. And when she said we don't want to have a Soviet-style election with only one candidate, I thought that was also well put, and it puts the Russia thing back in there. Look, that was a really well-written speech and well delivered.
Yes. I was going to say the same thing. That speech was actually very well put together. You were commenting on her advance, kind of behind the scenes. The flags, the way she looked. Yep. She looked presidential. Her remarks weren't, she actually spoke from prompters. It wasn't anything random and off, kind of off the cuff. It was very, very well done. She reminds me of something that in 2016, do you remember when everyone was clutching their pearls when Bernie Sanders was running an insurgent campaign against Hillary Clinton? We all knew that Bernie Sanders was not going to beat Hillary Clinton. But Bernie Sanders forever had an imprint on the Democratic Party. For better or for worse, like him or not, he meant something to the Republican Party. And night after night, and Democratic Party, excuse me, night after night, we saw Bernie Sanders racking up 33, 35, 40% of the vote against Hillary Clinton. And I would come on panels like this every night, and people would be like, oh, my God, Democrats, your hair is on fire. You have people rejecting Hillary Clinton. The same thing is happening today for Republicans.
Well, to challenge that just a tiny bit,
please.
Bernie actually stood for a number of things that felt qualitatively different from the centrist view of the candidates that were on the table.
Nikki Haley, if you look at her record on abortion, for instance. No, as a Republican, though, if I could speak.
No, I don't. I genuinely believe this. I just want to say that I think that I met the Bernie bros and the people who were supporting him, and they were die-hard. I haven't met as many die-hard Haley fans, except at this table and like in these circles. I just don't see the same devotion and commitment to him.
First of all, I'm not going to play devil's advocate because the devil doesn't need one, and I'm not going to sit here and support Nikki Haley like that and say that she stands for this level of conviction. What I am going to say, though, is that the framework is the same. The fundamentals are the same. Hillary Clinton had a faction of people in her party who did not want her to be the nominee until certain concessions were made, until the party bent in a certain direction, and the party did that. And this may not be the same on
and she lost.
I was going to say, she lost.
That's fine. But that was a policy-driven argument. What Nikki Haley is arguing is that this individual who's in the Republican Party leading the primary does not have the morals or ethics.
May I just hit this real quick? 2 points here. She's arguing the question of unfitness, and there is a large portion of the Republican Party, lifelong Republicans, who cannot support Donald Trump. And secondly, one of the most generation-defining issues that's on the table right now, aid to Ukraine. She is fundamentally in a different place than Donald Trump is at. And 67% of Republicans support aid to Ukraine. Those just don't happen to be primary.
Why do you think he is unfit?
I mean, countless reasons. January 6th is the most glaring. I think.
Why doesn't she ever mention that?
She should. I have, just by the way, this notion that I'm some kind of Nikki Haley sycophant, that's just, I just want someone to beat.
I'm saying supporter.
I want someone to beat Donald Trump, and I don't want to rest that all on Joe Biden's back at a time.
That's not the same as loving her, right? And that's the point that's being made here.
She should have made that more, and I've said from the outset of the primary, if she came out swinging harder, that she may be in a different place. If she had spoken about his indictments differently, she may be in a different place because she could sway people who could have been convinced that these are
missing. But we're missing the point. I'm not dare saying anybody's in love with Nikki Haley.
I don't think
What I am saying is that people are rejecting Donald Trump. And those are two different things. Like, people are rejecting Donald Trump. There was a large number of people in 2016. Now, sure, there were a lot of people who loved Bernie Sanders, but there was a rejection of Hillary Clinton by a certain number of people in the primary. All I'm saying is that there is a rejection of Donald Trump. And how do I know that? 38.8%.
A lot of those Democrats voted for Donald Trump in the general election. A lot of the Bernie Sanders supporters.
They're not voting for Trump today. Vast majority of those people are going to end up voting for Trump. The question is on the margins.
Yeah. Correct.
As Alyssa says, there will be a percentage of people that can't do it. We've seen in some of the exit polling throughout the primaries that some folks say if he's convicted, they'll consider him to be unfit. Actually, about a third in most of them. And that's a lot. I think most of them probably don't mean it or won't mean it by the time November comes around. But on the margins, there will be a few. The thing is, she's not giving speeches just indicting Donald Trump. If you didn't know anything about these parties and you didn't know anything about these people, you were a space alien and you were Kodos and Kang and you landed here, you would assume immediately. You would assume she was a third-party candidate.
Yeah.
This tonight, to me, sounded like someone who is running for president just as an independent, non-party person. Now, that's not really possible for her, but that's how it feels to me.
Donald Trump delivering a huge blow to former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley in her own backyard. We are digging into the numbers, and we'll talk next to one of President Biden's crucial supporters in South Carolina, Congressman James Clyburn.
Donald Trump just took another leap towards the Republican presidential nomination and a likely rematch with President Joe Biden by winning the South Carolina primary in what appears to be a rout of the state's two-term former governor, Nikki Haley. Haley telling supporters just a short while ago that she's going to keep campaigning. She's going to keep fighting on despite the outcome and despite the pressure to drop out. Let's take a look at where the votes are right now, with 60% of the estimated vote from the South Carolina Republican primary in. Donald Trump is ahead with 60.7% of the vote. He has 294,810 votes. That is more than 106,000 votes ahead of former Governor Nikki Haley, who has 38.7% of the vote and 187,920 votes. Again, that's with about 61% of the vote. Let's talk about this all with the dean of the South Carolina congressional delegation, Democratic Congressman James Clyburn, who serves as the co-chair of the Biden-Harris reelection campaign. Congressman, your reaction to this resounding Trump win in South Carolina and Nikki Haley's pledge to keep campaigning?
Well, thank you very much for having me. Well, this is not surprising. I think all of us expected that. All the polls predicted this kind of an outcome. But I just want to say, I believe that Nikki Haley should stay in the race. She is, I think, prepared to offer herself as an off-ramp that they may need between now and the convention. And if they get to the convention, she may be in position to be an alternative. So I don't think that she should take herself out of it, especially if she has the resources, and I understand that she does have, to keep going. She should keep going. If I were in her place, that's what I would do.
Are you saying that the Republican Party needs an off-ramp or an alternative because Donald Trump might become a convicted felon in the intervening time between now and the Republican convention?
Or some other things may get caught up with him. He's got to pay some big money now. That I understand he's having trouble trying to find the bonding that's necessary to satisfy his judicial issues. What is going to happen if they call the note, so to speak, and he's not able to pay it? So there are a lot of things that could happen short of a conviction in a court on any kind of felonies. I think he could be even more embarrassed if people found out that he cannot stand to pay this money that everybody says or thinks he had.
You say this vote is stronger than people expected Haley to get. And I know you say that you want the Republican Party to have an alternative or an off-ramp in case Trump cannot do the job as Republican nominee. But do you actually see a path to the nomination for her past South Carolina beyond some sort of extraordinary circumstance?
No, I don't. But there could be an extraordinary circumstance. And that's my point, that she should stay in to maintain a position in case it gets to that. Because remember, if Trump runs into problems, the MAGA Republicans are going to cry foul no matter what happens, and they will be a problem for her. So she should keep herself available for those Republicans who do believe in a forward thrust for this great country of ours.
I want you to take a listen to something that Donald Trump said last night at an event for black conservatives about why he thinks he is picking up some support from the black community. Take a listen.
I got indicted a second time and a third time and a fourth time. And a lot of people said that that's why the black people like me, because they have been hurt so badly and discriminated against. And they actually viewed me as I'm being discriminated against. The mugshot, we've all seen the mugshot. And you know who embraced it more than anybody else? The black population. It's incredible. You see black people walking around with my mugshot.
Your response, sir?
Please. I'm not going to respond to that. I'm an 83-year-old South Carolinian who's been through some very difficult experiences. I say all the time, all my experiences have not been pleasant, but I've considered all of them to be blessings. And to experience what is going on today, that Donald Trump and his affinity for insulting people, a whole race of people. But this is not unusual. The Central Park Five, what he did as a landlord in New York to black people, what it did to Omarosa, looking in the camera, referring to her, an African-American woman, as a dog, what he did to insult the former only African-American president we have ever had. Donald Trump is a disgrace. And I tell you, the only thing that I've ever experienced in that I really don't call a blessing is to have to live through Donald Trump's candidacy. And that, to me, should be an embarrassment to every red-blooded American.
Trump told that group of black conservatives that he was speaking to that, quote, you owe crooked Joe Biden absolutely nothing, unquote. He called President Biden racist. He attacked Biden for his role in the 1994 crime bill. You and I have spoken about your concern that black voters are not hearing enough about the good that, in your view, Joe Biden has done for the country and for the black community. Do you still have that concern?
Well, when I see all the gaffes, Trump had some cue cards on yesterday or last night and couldn't get his own wife's name right. There's something wrong with Trump, and we know there's something wrong with Trump. All of that meandering that he was doing today, but we never see any reporting on that. If Joe Biden commits a gaffe, a guy who stuttered all of his childhood into his adulthood, and everybody know his stuttering is what caused a lot of his speech impediments. And we know that. It has nothing to do with his brain. He stumbles one time and everybody says he's too old to be the president. Look, we had a president of these United States, I saw the rankings the other day, who in the top 10, and some people got him in the top 3. Franklin Roosevelt was in a wheelchair. It didn't bother his brain. He got elected president more often than anybody else in the history of the country. He ranks as being one of the best presidents we ever had, not because he was able to walk, but because he was able to think and do so in a way that benefits the American people, benefits this great country, keep us moving toward a more perfect union, not the foolishness that we're getting from Donald Trump.
Always an honor to have you, sir. Congressman James Clyburn, Democrat of South Carolina. Good to see you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.